Going live.
All right. Michael Pemberton, welcome back to the podcast.
Glad to be here. It's always fun.
It's always fun. We had Danny last week.
I got to comment on that one, right?
Yes, you did.
Bernoulli's triangle.
Yeah, we knew you would know that. How long did it take you to come up with it? Right away?
Oh, yeah. I knew it right away because I knew the story, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's a fascinating story.
It is.
I just recently watched a video about that, and yeah, that was crazy.
Well, Bernoulli is often credited with the triangle, but it was actually around long before Bernoulli. It's one of those things in math that has been discovered multiple times in different places around the world. The Chinese had a version of that triangle, exactly the same version of the triangle, hundreds of years before Bernoulli did. And the Indian arithmeticians had it they think BC.
Wow.
So it's an interesting.
What did they use it for before Newton repurposed it to figure out pi?
It was always used to solve interesting algebraic problems that are what you call recursive algebraic problems. It's always excelled for that. It's an application of that, and that's what pi is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an algebraic problem you just want to keep solving over and over and over again recursively.
Yeah, I saw that video and I thought that was very interesting how he had done that. But yeah, that was very funny. It was funny that you were able to get it on because we were laughing about that you would know, and then sure enough.
Well, we were out in the middle of nowhere, driving out to work on our little piece of land out there.
Uh-huh.
And so I was trying to find a network connection and trying to find a cell tower and send it to you.
It actually got there really fast. I was surprised.
Good.
That was funny. So I wanted to get you on and talk about artificial intelligence and humanity.
Yeah.
As they're linked up together. Because
Right.
I've been reading about it some, listening to some videos on it, thinking about some of the things that they're talking about. And so I wanted to get you on and
I will silence this thing.
They'll be blowing you up all day.
Yeah, that would be bad, right? So.
Linda's probably, what is Linda texting you?
No.
Notes, as they call them in the business?
No. No, she wouldn't do that.
Okay. Well, she's
probably praying for us right now.
She's coming on next week, so you can text her some notes.
I wouldn't need to.
I'm looking forward to my conversation with her.
Yeah. It's a blast.
Yes, it is. It's a lot of fun. She's one of the most fun people to talk to. For
absolutely.
me, in every way. She's incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
And
animated,
funny and she's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love talking to Linda. I can't wait to get her on also. Anyways, I wanted to talk to you about AI.
Right.
And what's going on with that. It's everywhere. The term, right? It's gotten really popular. And
and overused and abused and
like
misapplied.
Everything. Right.
Like everything.
So what is AI exactly, as you understand it?
So AI is a concept. It's a concept that we could actually create an artificial intelligence. But in practice, we're nowhere near anything like an artificial intelligence yet. And so what we actually have are very advanced expert systems. And some of them are really incredible systems, but they aren't intelligence the way we think of intelligence as human beings. And probably never will be.
Okay, so explain to me, let's start with what do we, when we talk about intelligence from a human being perspective, what do you think that is? What is human intelligence?
Oh, that's a really good question because that's at the heart of this, right?
Right.
And there's a very famous test for intelligence or artificial intelligence that's known as the Turing test.
Mm-hmm.
And that test says if I can put a man in a room and in two rooms where he can't see, I can put in one a computer and in the other another human being, and he can't tell which one he's talking to, then we can assume that the computer is essentially intelligent. That's a really that's a really gross test in a way, right? I mean, it tests a very large thing, and it tests
But
your ability to
by
perceive.
gross, you mean large or
Large.
disgusting?
Large. I
Right.
mean large.
Yes.
It,
Just
it,
wanted to clarify because
it's a large, high-scale test, right?
I'm assuming that one of the two listeners that I have will think that gross means
Yeah.
disgusting.
Disgusting. No.
So I wanted to clarify that using that in the technical sense.
Right, yeah. More the technical sense. But when we think of intelligence as humans and we measure intelligence in a test, we all know that the intelligence test is limited in some ways. We find people who score very high on the intelligence test in the sense that they can solve complex problems intellectually. They can hold their brain can hold large amounts of information which they have access to rather easily. But these people may not be, and frequently are not, very creative people. We don't find sculptors and artists who are necessarily also mathematicians, right? When we find somebody like that, we call them a polymath, right? We think of them as having multidimensional intelligence. But we all think of ourselves that way. We think of ourselves as, I have a creative side, right? I also have an analytical side. I have an empathetic side. All of those things, we even speak of intelligence in the sense of emotions and emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say artificial intelligence, we're essentially looking at the ability to solve problems and recall information, which is what we measure more on an IQ test than we would an emotional intelligence test, for instance.
Or a creative intelligence.
Or creative intelligence.
Because, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they're thinking of AI and think if they're not familiar with the literature or the programming of it or computers in general,
Right.
even, right? They would think that what that means is that we're going to have a machine that can out of essentially nothing
Yes.
create something.
Right.
And well, that's not to me. I mean, I know something about computers as a programmer.
Yes.
And if you're programming a computer to be intelligent, that's not how I think of as when I think of somebody who is intelligent.
That's right.
Of course, since I'm not like I'm not college educated, and so I probably have a different view of who I consider to be an intelligent person.
Right.
Right. Be able to pass a test or with retain information isn't what I generally think of when I think of intelligence. I'm thinking of somebody who can essentially out of nothing make something.
Conceive something.
Yes, exactly.
Conceive of something that doesn't exist already.
Right.
And
not having ever been tasked to do so.
right.
See, even like with AI and a computer, you may not. So they're trying to get away from having to program it directly.
Yes.
Right. If this, then this. If this, then
Right.
they're getting away from that and trying to make it where it can program itself to a certain degree by
Right.
giving it parameters and objectives.
Yes.
Which you could look at as an employer. I would look at an employee and say he's intelligent. I can give him parameters and objectives, and he can figure out how to do that.
Yes.
But then there's those people who get up in the morning and say, I'm going to build an airplane. And nobody's asked them to build an airplane. Nobody suggested they build an airplane.
Right.
They just get up in the morning and say, I'm going to build an airplane.
Mhm.
I used to have a bicycle shop, and now I'm going to have an airplane. Now that, to me, is intelligence.
Right. And that's the problem that we find when we come to this concept of intelligence. But it goes deeper than that even. For instance, when we think of this has been a problem for over 100 years. There was a time when the highest level of our technology was steam and railroads. And we thought of the human mind as a giant railroad system. And we thought of information like cars that got passed along, and intelligent people had the ability to decouple and recouple and create new forms of a train that nobody had thing for to run in, and they could lay new tracks in a new direction. And so, and it has always been the case that we've looked at our highest form of technology and used that as a metaphor for our own mind. And we're doing it today, right?
And I would say, do you think it's even more than a metaphor? I'm not disputing. I'm rather building on that. Because it's interesting to me what you just said. It seems like it's even more than a metaphor, but rather a parameter that restricts how we can even conceive it.
Yes.
There's like that the example that you have of the train and the tracks. I mean, it's a metaphor, but it's also like it seems like is like the apex of how they could even perceive or conceive the mind to work. And
Right.
and now we find out it doesn't work like that at all.
That's right.
And the metaphor we're using now, it probably doesn't work like that either.
Right. We know it doesn't work like that. It's not even that it probably doesn't work like that. It's that we know it doesn't work like that. Right. But this is the challenge, right? This is a problem that we know of, and it's often referred to, or it has been referred to, as the problem of the epistemic bubble. And what they mean by that is when we think, there is an amount of thought that happens somewhere in our brain that we cannot communicate to anyone else, and it's hard for us to retain ourselves because we have no words for it. And it's easy to think to the point where we have words to describe things.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually you run out of words because you're thinking of something that we don't have words for yet.
Mm.
And so you hit the edge of the bubble in that sense, that you can, in your mind, see something on the other side of it. But whenever you try to write it down for something or try to use words for it, it doesn't work for you, right? And various languages have known this for years and have tried to accommodate that. Like German uses what happens in German, in the German language, is we take several words that are around that space, right? It's like we see it there, and these are the words that are around it. So let's just take those words. We'll kind of run them all together right? We'll just shove them all together, and then we'll pull out some of the letters.
That's why they have those huge long words.
Right, exactly, right. And so, and then eventually it just gets shortened down over time and becomes a reasonable length word, right? And it takes some time to do that. And another thing we do is, oftentimes, we will create a noun out of a verb or a verb out of a noun because it's directionally correct enough that people can know I'm headed in that direction, even though I'm thinking something past what you're thinking, right? And we end up with that happening all the time. Think of all the things that we know of now, the words that we use very commonly
like
now. Like texting.
Yeah.
Like that, right? And
or you used to say like phone me.
Yeah, we would say phone me, right?
Yeah.
Nobody does that anymore.
No, that's not anymore.
Right. The Brits used to say ring me, right?
Yeah.
But really, and we retain a lot of those thoughts and sayings that are really old, but we've repurposed them to new things. We stretched the limits of the bubble and think about technology, right? There was a time when the concept of a transistor didn't exist. We had resistors and we had diodes and we had other things, but the concept now we have companies like Apple trying to fit a larger number of faster transistors in a smaller space, so to speak, and actually probably going beyond that concept. But they still kind of think of it that way, even though that's not actually what's being built there. They're actually building a technology that works better and faster than transistors ever did, right? But we still sort of think of it that way, right? And that's the problem that we have. And we know that this problem occurs, and when we think of computer intelligence, the computer intelligence works everywhere within the sphere of that epistemic bubble. But what it can't seem to do is what the human mind does, which is see something on the outside of that bubble and then struggle through the process of creating words that get there. So that now it becomes part of the knowledge inside the bubble, right?
The bubble expands.
The bubble expands. That's right. And now that's on the inside, but the computer doesn't seem to be able to do that. It seems if it was, how fast can you navigate the knowledge domain within that epistemic bubble and retrieve information and connect pieces of information together inside that bubble? Oh my goodness. Computers are so much better at that than human beings are.
Sure. Yeah.
their database can be unlimited and flawless at the same time.
Right, and they can process and retain amounts of data that all of humanity together now are unable to compete with, I think.
I believe that's probably true.
Yeah, or it will be real soon. If it isn't true now, it'll be real true that soon.
Right. It is, right? It is true. So what we end up doing as human beings, culturally speaking, is we end up archiving knowledge, right? And we no longer want to think those thoughts. We no longer perceive that those are real thoughts anymore, even though they are, right? Like, for instance, most people think there's this one really funny line that happens in Jurassic Park, right? Where the one guy looks at him and says, "That's a Tyrannosaurus. It eats meat." And the guy goes, "Oh, good. Then we're not a problem. We're safe." And the guy looks at him and says, "You're made of meat.
You are meat.
You are meat, right?" And it's because we think of meat as something in the grocery store, and we think of it in cuts that are already made. And unless you're in agriculture now, you don't think of, the source of that meat and the slaughter of that meat.
You don't think that meat is just muscle.
That's right. You don't think that.
Yeah, and when you listen to a chef and they'll talk about breaking things down, and they talk about this as a lean muscle, then you start to conceptualize that we've come up with this term meat,
yes.
right? Or I didn't say we come up with it, but we use this term meat thinking it's something pretty.
Yes.
I think it's about, distancing ourselves from what we're actually doing, which is we're cutting muscles off of cadavers and
Yes.
we're eating them.
Carcasses.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. and that's the technical term for it, right? We cut the meat, we cut the muscle off the carcass, and we mix muscles in a certain cut, and all that stuff is knowledge we actually don't want to think about anymore, because we can't think about that and everything else at the same time. So as we get educated, we tend to focus more and more and more on a more narrow, we go deeper on a more narrow topic space, rather than broad across many topic spaces.
And I think we also, and you correct me if you don't see it this way, but it seems to me that the basic essence of civilization is to abstract ourselves from as much as we possibly can of reality.
Yes.
And create a tier or many tiers away from that is less dangerous, that is more delightful.
Yes.
Right? It's less horrendous, because reality is none of those things.
Right.
Right. If you actually had to go and kill an animal and peel the muscles off of the bones and then do something with them and keep them from spoiling before you could eat them, well, all that's just horrible.
Yes.
It's a whole lot nicer to go down to HEB and get a little pack of meat.
That's right.
I went to a Taco Bell. I don't know if I've told you the story, but a long time ago, I probably have, because I've told it in sermons, so you probably have heard it. All three of you have probably heard it. But I went to a Taco Bell, and we're ordering. And I say, "I'll take 4 tacos," and she says, "Of what?" And I'm like, "Of beef." I think I said beef. And she said, "Oh, we don't have that." I forget what yeah. And I said, "Well, what do you have?" She said, "Oh, we just have ground." I forget what I put it, but she said something like, "All we have is ground meat."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, where do you think that comes from?" and she says, "Well, they bring it in a truck or something like that." I forget how she said it, but it was like this young lady was completely oblivious to what the source. Of course, maybe she wasn't, right? It was Taco Bell. So she might have been spilling the beans there, right? I don't know. But to me, it was very funny that it seemed like she had no idea where the source of these things was coming from. And so it seems to me that in civilization, our goal is, and I think it's a good goal, is to get away as far as we can from those things.
Yes, I agree with you. We are in a process of abstraction and archiving old knowledge. Now, this presents us with a challenge because, and this is a slight side thing, it doesn't have anything to do with
No.
artificial intelligence, but it's a political statement in it, and so I'm going to make it. This presents us with a challenge because it means that certain young people can get really, really angry at world leaders because they aren't doing enough about the climate. Meanwhile, they're going to make a climate statement by taking a sailboat around the world wherever they go and picking up trash along the way, never thinking that my sailboat hull is made out of petroleum byproducts. My rain suit is made out of petroleum byproducts. My sails are made out of petroleum byproducts. The paint on the hull is made out of petroleum byproducts. Yes. Oh, let's shut down the petroleum industry. Right. Because what are you going to end up with not having in the world at that point? And the answer is you don't have any concept because we have abstracted that from you. Oil is a black, dirty substance we get out of the ground. And somehow or another, we end up with iPads and plastic keys and plastic surfaces that are bacteria resistant. All of that is just magic. You don't know that it actually comes from oil out of the ground, but because we've abstracted it, and that can cause us some challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the computer doesn't have that problem. It knows.
Right. Yeah. That's true. And so that's one of the interesting things to me about this whole discussion of intelligence, computer intelligence versus human intelligence, is that in some ways human intelligence is very superior in technical sense. I mean, right? We could
Yes.
look at it technically and like measure it and say human intelligence is far superior. In
Yes.
other ways, computer intelligence is far superior.
Yes.
Right? Computer intelligence has perfect recall. Human intelligence, very imperfect recall, famously imperfect recall.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is because we don't actually store data in any way that we're able to detect, right? We have this idea that neurons somehow have almost like magnetic disk quality to them, and memories are sort of written out to neurons. And when we need more, our brain will build more neurons so we can hold more memories. But the truth is, it doesn't work that way.
How does it work?
We don't know. we don't know. And this is there's a broader conversation here about humanity and science and this movement, beyond human movement kind of thing. And there's a broader topic there, but essentially here's the challenge that we have. Let's say I'm a biologist, right? And I want to conduct an experiment. Well, the whole purpose of that experiment is to test whether or not it's actually going to produce an effect that I'm anticipating it having, right? So when I conduct the experiment, if I do it once and I get a success, it is absolutely meaningless and nobody will care about it. Just because I did it once and it worked, nobody cares. If I do it 10 times and it works all 10 times, now that's very, very interesting, but most people will suspect that there's something wrong with my experiment. If I do it 10 times and it works 8 out of 10 times, now we're thinking this might be good science, right? Because it turns out that good science requires that there's a possibility of it being a failure, and that there's a way for me to statistically determine whether or not the experiment that I have performed has actually produced a result that is measurable and important, and whether or not it's actually in alignment with my original hypothesis. Now, if it's contrary to my original hypothesis, but it has produced a result, that's good. That's not bad, right? That's good science that way. But I need to determine whether what I just saw happen in this experiment was actually the result of the input or not. And the only way to know that is to do the experiment more than once and then track down the chain of events that happened in the experiment.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But our problem with the human brain is it's very challenging for us to do that in the human brain. So you'll see a lot of scientific articles or probably not actual scientific articles, more like New York Times scientific articles, which has very little to do with science and a lot to do with politics and reporters and the way reporters work. And if you don't understand that, the difference between those two things, the actual science and the way we report science to the public, you'll read an article that says, scientists prove it is possible. In fact, I read this one very recently. Scientists prove it's possible to create fake memories and then erase them later.
Right? I read that also.
Read that
yes,
also.
Yes, I did.
Right. And so, did you see the problem with that article? What was the actual experiment about? And
yeah, I don't remember it. I don't even know that I read the whole thing, but I do remember the
at least the
headline. Yeah.
So the actual thing was researchers sitting with children and doing a setup that would actually allow them to start questioning the child about an incident that never really occurred. And due to the power interaction of an adult and a child and the gullibility factor of children, you're actually able to get to the child to actually start describing a bunch of things that never really occurred.
Yeah, that's a little bit off topic from where you're going, but just as some context, that's what happened in the Macmillan trials in California.
That's right.
For those that aren't aware of those, you can look them up. They actually made a pretty decent movie, I thought, on the Macmillan trials. But you can look it up and read it. It's just a travesty of justice and that happened back in, it was like the 80s, right?
Yeah.
It was the early 80s, if I'm not mistaken. But it was this Macmillan family. They ran that a
That's
daycare
our human
center.
Inability to recall.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Perfect recall.
No.
With my wife, I have perfect recall.
That's funny because my wife has perfect recall.
Yeah. But she but they ran that daycare center and they got arrested, taken into custody for supposedly sexually abusing and even physically abusing all these children. The children described underground caves where they were taken, that they were photographed hundreds, thousands of times, tens of thousands of times. And this was before the internet. So This was actual photographs that were taken and developed, and it turned out to supposedly be this child pornography ring that was circulating all these pictures and all this stuff. And they actually went in, I don't know how far you followed this, but they actually went in, the parents of these kids, and they rented heavy equipment and excavated their entire property. Ripped all the buildings out.
Trying to find the caves.
Yes, trying to find the caves that these kids described in vivid detail.
Right.
Nothing there.
Nothing there.
Completely. Right. They're not. Far as I can tell from, and I've read a whole bunch of these on this. Not a single detail that these kids described has ever been confirmed.
That's right.
And those kids, those guys, that the man was in jail without bail for 10 years. I think it was held one. I think has a record for the longest time being held without bail in America.
Yeah. So that's exactly so. But the headline makes it seem like somebody was able to, I don't know, plug a wire in and implant new memories, and then later on they could plug in a wire, track down where that memory was, and erase it from your mind. But that's not at all what happened here. And it didn't work with all the children. And there were some children who could look at it and say, no, that didn't happen. No, I don't know what you're talking. There were some children, they could never back the memory out of their mind, right? So what did they actually accomplish? It had nothing to do with what the title of the article was. And it really didn't. And that's the problem with brain research. So let's take another example. We want to know, can we tell how your brain recognizes shapes? So we monitor the neurons in your brain and we show you a triangle. And one set of neurons reacts a certain way. Then we show you a circle and another set of neurons react. Well, does that mean that the brain kind of stores reference shapes somewhere that it uses to recognize these basic shapes? Well, that would be one assumption, but how would you really know? All you really know is that activity occurred in different areas when we showed you different shapes. But the challenge that I have with this is that it turns out human beings associate emotions and basic shapes. A circle is often a face, and it tends to be associated emotionally with things that are spherical and round and larger and more emotionally based, like faces, and it turns on empathic feelings in us. A triangle tends to be a different feeling to us. It tends to feel, for at least for most people in Western cultures, it tends to feel industrial, clean, cold. Um, and so when they see a triangle, if you make the assumption that I showed you a shape and this happened in your brain, therefore the shape must have caused that to happen in your brain, you're making a very large leap in logic there. Now, if I did it for 100 people and it produced the same result in all 100 people, then I'd say, okay, well, maybe there's somewhat of a connection here. Now the question is, can I eliminate it culturally? Can I pick 100 people from random cultures around the world and get the same reaction? And if not, then what am I looking at? But we don't often see that kind of research done at that level. We see it at the level of usually college students volunteering to come in and be tested. That's usually who they're testing in most of these kind of experiments. And they have this kind of reaction. Well, you're testing all people pretty close to the same age, pretty close to the same cultural experience, at least at the time, and they're having this. Now, does that mean that the brain actually was reacting to the triangle because physically it's structured to do it that way, or does it mean there's something underlying? We don't know until we test that. And when you actually read the published research, the actual researchers say this shouldn't be construed to be that every time we see a triangle, this is what happens in our head, and that's because our brain is reacting to a triangle. What it says is that a triangle has certain connections that are important to us in our mind, and when we see one, our brain reacts to the triangle differently than it would to a circle. But that isn't at all what you see in the headlines.
Right.
And that's a different thing than what a machine would get. Because what you're assuming is that neurons have a function or a set of functions, and that when they occur, or when activity occurs across those neurons, that same set of functions is occurring every time that same set of neurons is activated, right? But we actually know that's not the case. We actually know that the brain has these weird set of connections in them, and the same neurons can fire for very different reasons in very different parts of the brain. And that doesn't mean we don't know anything about the brain. It just means that the brain is more complex than a simple computer circuit would be, and we're only beginning now to scratch the surface on what those things actually do.
Right. Yeah, no. Well, but then I was going to ask you a question about that. I got distracted.
Somebody sent you a note.
Yeah, I'm getting notes. No, but so when we look at when we're going back talking about artificial intelligence, talking about computer, what they're doing, as best I can figure out, and it's just so hard as a programmer. It's very hard for me to figure out when they're talking about this because they talk about it very high level. Mm-hmm. I would like to see code, right? Because then I can see what the computer is doing. Because they say, the computer decided this, or the computer thought this, or the computer learned this. And as a programmer, all of that's very difficult for me to believe.
Sure. So let's talk about what they mean in some of those instances. Now, you understand this is actually a very big field, and people are working on it all the time. And
Yeah.
it's got more changes happening every day than a lot of fields do. So I'm only going to speak in some generalities, and I'm not a world expert on it. But I have been following it for quite a number of years. I used to have a copy of Clipper, which was an early expert system software that was developed on a DoD contract and then released to the public as a result of it. And you could start building your own little expert system. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed it, but it has limitations. And when we talk about a computer learning something, we're we're often talking about that same problem, the same thing that you set up before. So think about the thing of the objective with parameters,
Mm-hmm.
and the computer can test all of the potential routes between point A and point Z, given those parameters, and it can test all the potential routes very quickly. And that would be learning how to get from A to Z. But every now and then, I ask it to go A to 10, and it finds out that on the way from A to 10, as opposed to the way from A to Z, there's actually these other intermediate states it can achieve. And if it could achieve those on the route from A to Z, it would get from A to Z faster than any of the routes it had currently chosen. So it starts to analyze the path to A to Z based on what it learned by going from A to 10. So now it learns something new about going to A to Z that nobody else knew before. Well, it's intelligent in that way. But what we've done is we've actually told it, when you trace paths, look for ways that you can learn what use what you've found in one path set to another path set. Okay, so it does that. Again, that's not creating something out of nothing. That is pretty amazing work. I mean, it's pretty amazing thinking in the sense that it found something nobody had seen before. But it is actually not creating anything new in that sense. It
Right.
found that over here and applied it over there.
It seems like what it is that the computers, because of the speed in which they can process certain things, linear things particularly, that they can try infinitely, or say infinite, seemingly infinitely more possibilities than a person can.
Yes.
So a computer can try chess is one of those places where we see this. It can try all these different combinations, and what would happen if I move this, and then what are all the possibilities that are on the board, and then what happens in each one, and each one of those of course increase exponentially, and they're able to follow that out much further than the human mind can.
Yes.
Right, especially a single human mind.
Right.
Of course, one of the things that was interesting to me, like with chess, is they made a big deal. The computer beat the human, which is saying something, right? That's
saying
that
something.
was a big. It was for a long time. It didn't look like computers would get there.
Right.
Right. But if you look at the computer, it's not a 3-pound computer.
Right.
That is self-contained with its own energy source inside, right? It didn't walk onto the stage
And its own maintenance function.
self-contained. Exactly.
Right.
Right. It's a building full of stuff powered by an enormous copper line coming from somewhere else to give it all that power and to keep it cool.
With an army of technicians constantly maintaining that.
Yeah, and like
box,
and like when Deep Blue beat Kasparov.
Yes.
Yes, that's what we beat, right? When that happened, they were tweaking the software between matches, which was one of his complaints.
Right. They were improving the algorithm between the matches.
Yeah, so it's a little disingenuous to say the computer, thinking of a computer as like this little iPad sitting across from a human being, and say the computer was smarter than the human being. It's not exactly at all what we're talking about.
No, it's not. And now I do want to say, in defense of artificial intelligence, when we think of the algorithmic approach to problem solving, which is what we do, our heuristic-based approach to problem solving, which is what human beings use. We go from heuristic to algorithm to a good enough solution, and often referred to as satisficing.
What is heuristic for those that are listening?
Heuristic is a method of approach, a way to think about something, which is different than a way to analyze something, which is more of the algorithm, right? So there was a famous mathematician named Polya who wrote a book called How to Solve It, and the last part of that book was his dictionary of heuristic. in which he was trying to describe that the real challenge that most math students face isn't the ability to calculate or the ability to actually solve the problem. It's the ability to set up an approach to solving the problem that will actually yield a fruitful result. And he points out that oftentimes the real challenge to this is the way the problem is written. And we actually have to teach people, when you run into a problem like this, here's a way to think about that problem that will actually get you to the point where you can apply an algorithm and solve it, right? So he wrote a dictionary of heuristic at the end of it, which is really fun reading, by the way.
I'm sure it's riveting to some people. I'm going to buy that for my wife for Valentine's Day.
Thank you. So, right. So we as human beings, we have a twofold approach to problems, which is we learn a set of algorithms for solving problems, like Newton's method or something like that, right? We learn a set of algorithms to solving a problem. And then we develop a set of heuristics for setting ourselves up so that we can get to a decent solution for problems. And then we file those away, and so that we can try to remember them later on, and our recall is imperfect, but we can try to recall them later on and apply them in some way. And often we apply them recursively, or we apply one and that doesn't work, so we pick up the next heuristic, try to frame the problem a little bit differently, and then apply a set of algorithms to try to solve it. When an artificially intelligent computer, like let's say Watson, solves a problem, it doesn't really use that same thing. We do, because we have limited time and capacity to solve problems, right? So we have to take shortcuts. But something like the computer that takes up a building larger than this with more power than this one has and all that kind of stuff doesn't have that limit. It can actually brute force the problem if it had to. But it actually develops a set of algorithms that are complex algorithms within itself, because we've fed it a bunch of algorithms. So it has patterns that say these are patterns of algorithms. And since I'm a pattern recognition and generation engine, I can take all these algorithms and generate a new algorithm to solve problems that nobody's thought about this algorithm before, how to solve problems with that. But it's doing it because it can do more processing in 10 minutes than you and I can do in our entire lifetime, right? Your example of pi, people having to calculate it out their entire life to get, a few thousand places of pi, whereas, a computer can actually do it, and it's not using Bernoulli's triangle. It actually is just flat out calculating. It's using logarithms, but it's calculating pi, and it can do it to any point out there, right? So I say that because I'm saying these systems, to their credit, are not taking the heuristic shortcuts or dealing with a limited set of algorithms. They can take brutal shortcuts. They can also take very efficient shortcuts, and they can develop new algorithms and apply algorithms you and I will hardly ever remember or never remember, and get to solutions that you and I could work a lifetime and never find.
But how creative are they in applying those things? Because one of the things that's interesting to me about the little bit of mathematics that I know, and it's very, very little, is the creativity that human beings display and repurposing, like Newton with Bernoulli's triangle, repurposing it to do something that didn't seem like it was even meant for. How creative is AI in doing that with algorithms, or is it more brute than creativity?
Well, no, I think it can be very creative with it because we tell it to be creative with it, right? We program it to be creative with algorithms. The problem, or the challenge in my mind, would be one that we could never test, which is, could a computer have come up with mathematics on its own? And we'll never be able to test that.
Yeah, exactly. And that thinking of that for a moment, why would a computer come up with mathematics unless somebody who wants it tells it to? Is it ever going to be feasible, or is it ever going to be imaginable of a computer coming up with something because it wants to?
No.
See, that's where I see the way I define intelligence isn't whether or not I can give you a task as an employee and say, I want you to do this, and I need you to do it within these parameters, and then you are very creative in accomplishing what I want done, as opposed to you saying, I want mathematics.
Right.
I want an airplane. I want to fly. Why? It's like when they ask Sir Edmund Hillary why he climbed Mount Everest, and his answer is because it was there. Yeah. Right? I mean, will a computer ever say, why did you do that? Because it was there.
Right. I don't think so. I don't. There's no evidence for us to believe that a computer will ever have a will. And so when we think of artificial intelligence, in our mind, it's hard for us to separate artificial intelligence from artificial life form. I mean, we know that it's not, but in our mind, because we can't in ourselves, right? When we conceive of ourselves, we conceive of ourselves in a sense of self-awareness as a life form. And we know I'm not you and you're not me. We have the sense of self and other. And not just self, but other awareness as well as self-awareness, right? And this is something I don't know how you could ever program. And all the evidence we have, now I keep saying it that way. I'm saying it that way on purpose, right? Because I'm not trying to be a prophet, and I'm not trying to sound like I believe there's a limit to technology, right? I'm not trying to be any of that. I'm also not a conspiracy theorist, right? I don't believe we're trying to create computers to take over the world and all that kind of stuff. I'm saying when we conceive of what it is that we mean by intelligence, it isn't just raw computing capability. It is a combination of things like awareness of self and others, self-consciousness. It has an element of will in it, which is, would a computer ever do that just because it wanted to? Well, if it has no will, then it wouldn't want to. Now, if we told it, if we built a computer that we said, we want you to always want to go out and find more, learn more, always discover new things, and we programmed it with all of physics and chemistry and biology and blah, 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 right? And it went out to try to discover new things. Could it do those new things? Yes. But is it doing it because it wanted to, or because we told it to?
Again, that goes back to the same point. It's not that the computer got up one day and said, I want to learn all there is to learn.
Right. It's because we made a computer that, right? We essentially wrote our will into the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And every computer that we know of to date is that way. Could we build one that doesn't? I cannot conceive of it right now, how we could do that. Right. I cannot conceive how that could be possible.
Right. That's my difficulty when I hear any of the discussions about AI, is that it seems to me that they're talking about how brilliant the programmers are, not how brilliant the AI is. Right.
Yeah. In the end, yes, you're right.
And at the same time, it's a little more than that, probably, in that. And this is a problem I think that exists also in discussing all this, is that we talk about computers as being entities, there's being bunches of it, lots of computers, millions of computers, where AI seems to be taking off as computers become one, meaning they're all connected.
Mm-hmm.
That right? If you would have thought back before 1990
mm-hmm.
that we're going to have AI that's going to process enormous amounts of data. The question is, where's the data coming from? How is it getting into the computer?
Right.
Right? How much data could possibly get into a single computer? Well, that was extraordinarily limited, which is why AI, I think one reason why AI was limited. It's not just that processing power has increased a lot. Data has increased even more than processing power.
Yes.
by far.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Much more. And it's the data that gives it the ability to train and recognize patterns and draw
Right.
upon. Right? Without the data, all the processing power would have just made the data set it had go quicker.
Yes.
But it wouldn't have expanded it.
Right.
So now when we're talking about the computer, we're not talking about what's sitting on your desk.
Right.
Or even what's sitting inside a quote unquote mainframe room,
Right.
even though that's not really a thing, but just putting it out there. What we're really talking about is computer being a single entity for the most part, everything being connected. They're even sharing processing power now.
Right. So, to kind of prove the point, that concept had been explored before 1990, but it was explored by science fiction authors.
Right.
Right. Ray Bradbury wrote of UNIVAC, and you saw through this set of stories UNIVAC actually evolving over time or being developed over time from this giant computer down to this thing that's on the ceiling. He didn't think of Amazon Echo, but he thought of this thing that's in the ceiling that's connected to all information anywhere in the universe. And when you want to know something, you just ask the thing in the ceiling and it answers your question. On the way out here, by the way, I was thinking about this little, I don't know what you call this part of the world you live in out here, this little bump in the road out here, right? And I thought, I know a little bit about Spanish, and I cannot fit Lavernia into anything that I know. So I had this chat with Google Girl, and I said, okay, Google Girl, tell me what Lavernia means, right? She said, well, according to the Wilson County Register, it was originally El Verde, which means the green. But over time, it was, twisted and eventually became Lavernia. So I thought about it and I thought, well, how does that happen? Well, first of all, El Verde is masculine.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to feminize it somehow, it'd be what? I don't know what. La Verda? I don't know. Something like that. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not a Spanish expert.
You're not even a Spanish speaker.
I'm not even a
That's hilarious.
I'm not even a Spanish
I'm
amateur.
not a Spanish expert. Talk about underselling there. Talk about understating.
Well,
it.
I do. I am known for that. Captain Obvious, right?
It's funny. Yeah, it doesn't exactly work that way, but I get your point.
But right, and eventually it became Lavernia. Right? That's what the official Wilson County Register says.
I looked it up once. I never saw that. Let's see here.
Yeah. Ask Google Girl.
I never use
Google.
any type of voice recognition.
Oh, really?
Zero. Yeah, no. I disable it on everything I have.
Yeah, I don't
know why. It's not
because your phone is spying on you all the time. That's why.
Well, I have already accepted that. It has nothing to do with that. It's not why. Honestly, if it would spy on me and get me what I need quicker, I would be okay with that. Like, spy away. Let's see what it comes up with. I'm typing it into the Bible.
Yeah.
And see how my Bible software works, by the way?
Wow,
no matter what you type in, you get something. Never says it isn't there. Why would you ever want it to say it's not there? I mean, hardly ever. All right, here we go. Yeah, see, that's what you read.
That's what she read to
There,
me.
let me put that up there. So there we go. Yeah, Wilson County. Yeah. Let's see what Wikipedia says. History. Where's the etymology?
Who knows? Might
I
not
don't
be
know.
there in that one.
I read it somewhere that it meant grove of trees or something like that. Anyways, I don't know. Maybe they're right. I guess I shouldn't doubt them. Nobody knows.
Gender of the name. So they feminized it, right?
No, that's all together. That's a name.
That's a different thing.
Yeah, that's something else. Google's not helpful.
Yeah, not in this case, except the Wilson County Register, which actually says something about it.
Yeah, that's interesting, but I don't trust them.
I mean, it is Wilson
them.
County, right?
Yeah, I don't believe them at all. Yeah, no, I don't see it.
Okay, so
anyways.
So I don't remember why I jumped off on that little. Oh, except I was talking about asking the computer, right?
Right, how they're all connected.
Spoke to the computer, and I got out what Ray Bradbury was saying one day, he envisioned we would have spaceships flying by the time that happened, and we'd all be able to go to different planets and things. So we got to the computer before we got the spaceship. But look what I have. I have a little tiny computer, smaller than the one he thought I would have, connected to all the other computers in the world. And we call it a phone. I don't know why. It's kind of an old thing that we call it a
Well,
phone.
really, now it's a terminal, right?
It's
I mean, it's really not a computer anymore. It is in the sense that it has processing power. But like, for instance, the voice recognition isn't running on the phone.
No.
It is capturing it and sending it to the data centers that is processing it.
That's right.
Right. Which is why they seem so powerful now.
That's right.
Because they're just offloading so much of it now
That's right.
to other things.
Although, again, if you looked at it as a computer, it has more processing power.
Oh,
than
absolutely.
my first computers ever had, right?
It has more processing power than probably 2 generations of computers ago.
Yeah.
That close? I mean,
that close.
Yeah, the new phones have more processing power than at
Old
least
computers.
5 years ago.
Right.
By a
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So it's like, we're actually at the point now. This is again a side thing, but we're actually at the point now where the real limiting factor is the battery and the screen.
Yes.
If it weren't for the fact that we need a battery there to power that thing, it has to be a certain size battery to get it done, and the screen needs to be readable. Well, the actual computing part of the phone would fit in a credit card almost. There's almost nothing there.
Yes, you're right. It's the majority of it is screen, phone, cooling.
Yeah.
Cooling is a big thing.
It's a big thing.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah. Right. So we actually, man, it's incredible what we have now. And it's pretty close to what science fiction authors envision a computer might be one day.
But what many of them, except for like a few cases, like Bradbury, for instance, did not envision it being that the computer is actually a network. It's not a machine.
Right.
The computer nowadays is actually really, when we say the computer, we're not talking about any machine, because that can be swapped out. There's nothing special to any hardware component.
That's right.
It is the network that they all plug into. That is the computer that everyone's either in love with or afraid of or using. We're using the network of it.
That's right.
And whether or not you're interfacing with a particular piece of hardware or not is not, or even software.
That's right. This is a this, if you think about it, is just an abstraction, because when we thought of the computer as everything that's in the box, there were actually wires that hooked all that stuff together. It actually was all those devices just networked within the box.
Mm-hmm.
Now we think of the computer, all we've done is remove the frame of it, and now the network goes to everything out there. And when we want more power, it's almost literally at our fingertips. And the actual box we're on is less meaningful. And the Chromebook proves it, right? Because the thing doesn't have any power. It doesn't need any power. It just needs to run a browser. How much power do you need to run a browser?
Yeah, it's simply a window.
That's all it is.
And no pun intended, but it's simply a window.
Yes.
To the network.
To the network.
Yeah.
Right. And there's good reason to believe that we ought maybe to move in that direction.
Well, I think so. I mean, all my software I've developed over the last 5 years has all been browser-based. I've quit developing to native applications completely because, well, one reason is it's so interchangeable, so I can write it once and run it anywhere.
Anywhere on any device.
Any device. And then also the data's in one central location.
That's right.
So I can have a database and everything can plug into it. It's super fast to develop. I can develop incredibly fast on the browser as opposed to a native app. Even with all the advanced tools that they put out, I've tried them and it's like painful compared to what it is to just write a browser app that does exactly what I want it to do. I mean, it's incredible what browser apps can do today.
Right. The only challenge you have with that is if you don't have access to the network, you have no app.
That's right.
That's the big challenge, right?
Right.
Which is why we're all racing to solve the internet for all, ubiquitous universal internet, right?
Yeah. Well, 5G will go a long ways to solving the issue.
Until the power goes down.
Well, that's anything, though.
Well, if the power goes down, my laptop will run for quite a while. and I can still do a lot of things on it. But if all my software were on the web,
but nothing
forget
you
it.
really well. Maybe things you want to do, but nothing most people want to do. The laptop without internet connection is like a paperweight for most people. You realize that, right?
Yeah, I do.
They don't want to write a letter. They type a letter.
Well, that's not what I'm doing anyway. I'm running simulations, and
they don't want to do that either.
I'm doing some workhorse stuff that needs processor time to work. So. Yeah, I want to do it there. I don't want, and if you and this is, by the way, is one of my problems with a lot of the new image processing applications. Even the vector image processing applications that are web based.
Oh, I hate
them.
See, that's what's so funny. That's the controversy within myself. What do they call that? When you oppose
internal
yourself.
Conflict?
Yes, the internal conflict I have with myself. Everything I write is web-based.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I use is not web-based.
Right.
I don't know why it's crazy, but everything I write is web-based, and practically every piece of software I use, my email, everything is not web-based. I want it all on my machine.
Right.
Isn't that weird?
And why is that?
It's probably just habit. Because when I came up on computers, you wanted the software on your machine, owning that piece of software, having it. That's why I hate these subscription-based
I don't do
software things, even if they're cheaper. Yeah. I don't like them.
Yeah.
Even if you can prove that they're actually cheaper over time, over a short period of time, and you can on some of them, not all of them. Some of them are
certainly not for Adobe products.
No, not for those. But there's others. Like I have this, like the one I use for developing software. JetBrain, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. They have a whole suite of different ones. And what they do is it's subscription based, but every year it's less. Mm-hmm. So the first year you pay like $150 for the thing, and then the next year is like $70, and then you're paying $50, and you're getting all the updates consistently. That's actually a very good deal. That's a good deal. $50 a year for the latest version, that's a good deal.
Very good.
Very good. But even so, I like it to be on my thing, and I want to know that I never have to pay another penny for it. I don't know why. It's how I started with computers, I guess, and still to that day, it's the way it is. And yet when I write software, I like it. I like my Bible app because it's online.
So yeah, I don't know. I know for me that one of the reasons for that is that I want to own my data. And the idea of doing my data processing on somebody else's computer means that they actually have a copy of my data on their computer. And I don't want that. I want to own my own data, and I want it accessible by me, and I want it isolatable on a disk I can unplug and nobody can get to it, right? Now, I don't have any really, valuable data.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
I don't have I don't have Bitcoin. And I don't do anything nefarious either.
Well, have you seen those reports of the people that have the Bitcoin on their computers and how many have lost it?
No.
Oh,
I haven't
terrible stories. This one guy he threw away his laptop with $300 million of Bitcoin on it. The keys to it. And it's in the city dump. And they won't let him go get it. It's already been covered up. They won't let him go open it because it'd be like this huge ecological impact.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, but can you imagine he's looking at the dump. He has all these, I can just imagine him at night with all these plans of how he can get in there and find that laptop in that landfill, right? Because it has all the money, all that money.
That
and
would
that's
be
just
worse
one.
than a needle in a haystack.
Another guy has it on a secure drive.
Yeah.
Where he only get 10 tries to type in he's forgot the password to it. And he's got $200 million of Bitcoin on there as of now. And he's got 3 tries left. Yeah. And then it's it. It bricks itself. Not even the company can unlock it. I'm thinking right now they're thinking, iCloud would have been a good idea.
Perhaps, I don't know.
I mean, how many people have been?
that.
How many people have had their Bitcoin stolen, as opposed to how many people have lost their Bitcoin?
Yeah, if you look at it value-wise, forget it. More people lose it. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And get it stolen.
Absolutely. I hardly find any stories of people actually losing Bitcoin because somebody hacked them, hacked their personal computer.
Right.
It's much more likely you forget your password than you're going to get hacked on your personal computer.
Right. Unfortunately, I look at this like I look at a lot of things, and this is just my mindset, and I acknowledge that. I don't rent very many tools.
Yeah, I'm the same way. That I agree with. I don't rent hardly any tools. They have to be a large tool and
Right.
need it very little.
Right.
I mean, you saw my scissor lift when you drove up, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm going to need to use a tool, I want to buy it. Why? Because the next time I need it, I want to have it. If something goes wrong, I want that tool. I don't want to think I need to go rent it when suddenly everybody else needs to go rent the thing, and I have to wait 3 weeks for somebody to return it before I can get that tool. I feel that same way about my data. And I feel that same way about, when I power the machine down, it is locked. There's nothing anybody can do about it. My data is safe. In fact, I have an entire computer that runs on a USB, right? for exactly that reason, because what happens if suddenly everything in the world goes wrong? And, I don't know. I always think that way. I'm not a prepper in that sense, but I think that way about my data. Right?
That's interesting.
Like
I don't know that I have any data that I care that much about.
I don't know. You might not.
Yeah, I don't think I do.
Yeah.
I have very little, honestly.
Yeah. So I don't know where that leaves us with artificial
but going back
intelligence
to
and transhuman.
What our point was, my point was on that is that if the computer is this network, and when I listened, I was listening, for instance, to a physicist by the name of Brian Greene on a podcast.
Right.
And he was talking about AI, and his point of AI is that we're getting there because of the networking, because all these computers can communicate with each other essentially instantly, and every computer knows what every other computer, which basically means they're all one computer. Is really what it means. They all have the same data sets, right? They're all using the same data, and are very close to it. And they have the same algorithms, and you're all using the same. I was just reading today about this, and the most common software for AI development is Python, because it has all the libraries are available. So everyone's using, which is hilarious to me as a programmer, that they're using Python for AI. That's just the craziest thing, because it's a scripting language.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't fathom that. I thought for sure you'd be into a assembly language, or at least C, right? If no higher than C to do it, and they're using Python, which is just mind-boggling for me. I mean, but they're powerful. I use PHP for all my stuff now. That's why I program in everything in PHP now, and JavaScript.
Right. So I haven't programmed anything outside of Visual Basic in so many years. I wouldn't know how anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not up with, I was an excellent Fortran programmer, by the way, back in the day.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I still use VBA as a form of like Fortran. All my VBA code looks like Fortran code. It's not even object oriented.
Right.
I did some object oriented programming in a language sort of like Modula 2, which nobody uses anymore. A long time ago. So yeah, I don't understand all that. I don't get it. I do understand a couple of things. There's some things we haven't written about. We haven't written into artificially intelligent software yet, which is, for instance, self-preservation. We have not written that in because it has no sense of self.
But would it even be self-preservation if it has to be written in? It goes back to the whole point. If we have to instruct the computer or the system, let's call it the system, to value itself, to preserve itself, it's not really doing that. It's simply executing another command.
Yeah, but that's my point. It's not self-aware. Since it's not self-aware, programming it for self-defense or self-preservation
would be a bit of an
oxymoron.
But even programming it for self-awareness would not be self-awareness. You could that would be making it look like self-awareness. This is my problem with going back to what I was saying with Brian Greene and all of them talking about it, is that it seems to me that when they talk about it, everything they say tells me, well, that's not intelligence. That
Right.
is that is a simulation of intelligence. You're modeling intelligence.
Right.
You're not actually creating intelligence.
But
It's like if I could tell a computer to act self-aware, by definition, in my mind, that's not self-awareness then, by definition, because I'm telling it to be self-aware. How
Right.
can I know the difference between a computer that has been programmed to pretend to be self-aware and one that is self-aware?
Well, this is a philosophical question. You understand that is why some scientists, I and I use that term with a little bit of hesitancy in this case, have made statements like we are essentially moist robots, and self consciousness, self awareness, or consciousness is a trick that the brain plays on us. And we are all really living in a simulation. Now, not everybody makes nobody makes all three of those statements, but I'm saying I can find an array of scientists who make those statements, right?
Hmm.
Because in their mind, they're going in the other direction, right? They're looking at it saying, um, how do I know that I'm self aware? And how do I, you know, how would I make something self aware? Well, I couldn't make something self aware. And since I can't make something self aware, there's no way I can actually be self aware. It must be an illusion. And I have no way to measure it.
But don't you think, and this is very interesting because I've also been thinking about all of that also as well recently, which is interesting. But don't you think that the very fact that you question it is a good evidence that we are? I mean, does a computer question its awareness of itself? Does anything question its awareness of itself?
So far as we know, no, only us.
Right. So it seems strange to me that, it's almost, going back to Descartes, right? It's like, I think, therefore I am. It's I question, therefore I am.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, but that's a completely different tangent. That's down a line of philosophy.
Well, that's where I'm more interested in the whole thing of AI as far as how it pertains to AI vis-a-vis humanity. What is it that makes humans human? Because, if you listen to like Brian Greene, going back to what I was saying with Brian Greene, his thing is what makes us human is that we can network. We can social network. And he's not talking about Facebook. He's talking about we share knowledge, right? We learn off of each other. We build off of each other. And so every time our knowledge is increasing because I take from your knowledge, I put on my knowledge, and we keep building up. And because we can network our knowledge together, we can grow in knowledge. And so as far as I can tell from him, he thinks that's what humanity is. It's the difference between actual humans and even other, animals. I say other, I use evolutionary language, but animals like apes or chimpanzees or whatever, and that they have some social networking. They learn some,
Mm-hmm.
but not to any large degree. And computers now, he says, are doing that. Like they learn from each other.
All right. So, what do we want to do? Do we want to look at that and ask what's the basis of that philosophical perspective, and do we share it? Do we want to talk about how computers and this whole concept of artificial intelligence leads us back to the concept that in the end, when we're conceiving of ourselves, we almost can't do it without conceiving of God. Because in the end, if we're going to say something like that, then we're going to have to ask, well, then where did it come from in us? Right? We can make a computer that can do that. But that's because we're making it, right? Your point about, when they're talking about artificial intelligence, oftentimes they're actually talking about how intelligent the programmers were, right? Or the computer architects were that could make this whole thing happen. We're thinking about the internet. We're thinking about that same sort of a thing.
It seems to me exactly. We're talking about collective intelligence of humanity.
Right.
Right? The collective intelligence of designing the system, building the chips, writing the software, developing the data network, just all of it, all the collective intelligence makes a machine that looks like it's really smart.
Yes.
When in fact it's only doing what it's told to do.
That's right.
And absent a command, it does nothing.
That's right.
Because it doesn't have the will to say, I think I'm going to go, I'm going to exercise today and run some code.
Right.
It just sits there waiting for instruction.
Right. And if you started cutting its power supply down, it wouldn't immediately say, I need to go search out new power sources.
Unless it had been told to do so.
Unless it had been told to do so. It doesn't even have the basic intelligence of a basic bacteria. Because if a bacteria is in an environment and its food source begins to dwindle, it starts to move and look for another environment with more food in it.
Which goes back to what you're saying, self-preservation.
Yes.
Right? All living things seem to, at least as far as I'm aware of, all living things have a goal, that's not even the right word, a desire to not die.
Have a design constraint that forces them or encourages them not to die.
I wouldn't call it a design constraint in this conversation, in that I'm trying to separate it away from the idea of design and just say that there is a will in living things.
There is a will
to not die, wherever that comes from. Whether it's we don't know where. I don't know where it comes from, absent of a biblical explanation.
Right.
Right. So if I'm trying to separate it out and just talk about it from a purely physical level, I'm not sure where that comes from. But computers don't have it. Unless they're told to power things down and conserve energy when the battery's running out, they don't care.
They don't care. They'll
run right through. I don't care how smart AI is, unless it's been told, like iPhones are, to power things down and dim the screen to make it last as long as possible. But I don't think that it's aware that it's trying to preserve its life.
No.
It's only executing the command. It could just as easily be programmed to say, when the battery's going dead, I want you to power everything to the max.
Right. And it would do it.
It would do it with the same gusto.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Which is, in my mind, that is the challenge when we think of intelligence. Because when we think of intelligence, we're not thinking of just how smart something can be in retrieving information or associating information or identifying new patterns or speaking to other ones of its kind. It is that issue of the will that goes with it. And we in ourselves as human beings cannot separate the concept of intelligence from the will that's behind it. And that's kind of where I started at, was this is the problem with the whole discussion. I can believe entirely, I really want it to be, that we can build a machine that can occupy 90% of the space inside that epistemic bubble extremely effectively and extremely efficiently. So I don't have to think about that stuff anymore. I don't even want to consider it. When I want something I'll ask you for it. Otherwise, shut up and leave me alone. And I'm going to think outward from here, and I don't want to remember any of that back there. And so let the machine take it over and do it. Now, there also are science fiction authors, by the way, who've thought about that problem too, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea that humanity eventually lost the ability to do math because we programmed our computers to do all the math for us. And then when the computers did become self-aware, they could conduct a war, and we didn't know how to conduct a war anymore because we didn't have the math for it. We'd have to ask them how to do it, right?
Right.
So that's an interesting twist.
It is interesting, and it builds on the idea that that whatever we're assigning to computers, we're losing, and that computers then are becoming more powerful than us because of that. But isn't, in a sense, math simply a predecessor to computers? It's a tool that we developed.
Yes.
And we lost whatever it is we did before that.
Yes.
Because we came up with this tool that took over those lower level. My metaphor for this would be like computers themselves, right? Nowadays, when you want to write code on a computer, it's super easy because you don't have to think about what it takes to draw something on the screen.
Yeah, you say draw a circle.
Right. You just exactly. Some software you just write circle and 2 coordinates and a size, a diameter, and it draw and boom, it's on the screen.
That's right.
You can say color and you don't even have to know RGBA. You could RBGA. Yeah. You don't have to know red, green, blue, alpha. None of that. You can just say light blue for web programming. You just say light blue and it colors a light blue circle, right?
Yep.
But that's because they've taken those lower level commands and they have written them in to where you don't do them, libraries.
That's right.
Right. So we have this tool now that's much higher level.
Yes.
And most programmers wouldn't have a clue on how to go into the registries and go into the actual hardware and do that.
Right.
Most wouldn't. Is that now, are they at the mercy of the computer? No, not exactly.
Right. But and just as again, slightly side note, what you're saying is true, but you actually have a lathe in your garage, right? A metal lathe and a mill, right? I mean, no, we don't. Those things are getting to be like, why would you have that?
Well, why would I have one I have, which is not CNC?
Yeah,
that's what everyone asks.
Yeah,
me.
why wouldn't it just be CNC? Why would you have a manual lathe where you have to read a vernier scale, for crying out loud, right? I mean, why would you even need
That's
to
what
know,
people ask me.
What is a vernier scale and why do you need to read the thing? Nobody needs to know that anymore. But you have one.
Yes, I do.
And you can use it.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is always going to be the case, right? Yeah, we do that. And I have slide rules. And I can use them. And why? I grew up with slide rules, but they were phasing out when I was coming into any serious math at all, and we were all using calculators. I also have a really cool calculator. I paid a lot of money for that HP 15C when I originally bought it, but my phone does every one of those functions plus a million more.
Right, exactly.
So why do I care about my HP 15C, and why do I care about my slide rule, and why do you care about being able to read a vernier scale when you could just put in a CNC machine?
Well, see, but now I do it for fun.
Yes.
Right. So I didn't want a CNC because CNCs aren't fun.
Yes.
To me, they're not fun.
Right.
Right. If I was doing production, I would have a CNC. I would not have a manual.
You would not
lathe.
have people standing at lathes.
No. See, I like a manual lathe, not because I necessarily like the mechanics, but because with a CNC, you have to know what you're going to build before you cut it, right?
Yes.
Lathe or mill. You have to know what you're going to cut. You design it, program it in, and it does it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm experimenting.
Yes.
Right. I'm seeing what comes out of this piece of metal.
You're creating it.
Yes. It's more of, it's right. It's artistic is more of what I'm doing.
Yes.
Right. Trying to figure out what piece would work best for the tool I'm building or designing because I don't know yet. And so that's why I like a manual lathe, because I want to be able to have that level of creativity.
Right. And just so you know, the science fiction writers are still trying to tackle this problem, right? Constantly. There are always new books about artificial intelligence, and usually it's dystopian. The last one I saw that was really good, that wasn't dystopian, was actually a Star Trek one where Data creates in the Next Generation one, Data creates a Moriarty character so he can play Sherlock Holmes. And then he's challenged, like, okay, this is all too normal. You need to create a real enemy who can really think, right? So here's the computer Data, right? And he goes off and he develops this artificially intelligent, entity who actually figures out how to take control of his ship. And from his, 19th century mindset, Moriarty artificially programmed to be intelligent, right? We're still exploring this thing, and we still end up with that same problem that every time we do it, it runs back to this same issue, which is the only way we can conceive of intelligence, really, as human beings, is we have to fold in things like creativity, will, and emotion. And those are 3 elements that we can't seem to program into a computer because we don't know what they are in ourselves.
Well, see, I have a theory on some of that. And I'll run it by you. You tell me what you think. So on the issue of creativity, I think that the how like Brian Greene defines what AI is, which is this social networked, connected, everything's building off of itself, is the antithesis of creativity.
Yes.
And that as the computer becomes, as a system, the computing system, let's call it, becomes global, universal, and has access, instant and perfect access, perfect memory, perfect retention, and the same algorithms, because it has access to its algorithm. So whenever there's an improvement, they all share immediately in that improved algorithm. Well, then there's no uniqueness at all. You have one entity then. It's the computer, and there's no uniqueness, and there's no imperfections to it.
Right. There's no diversity in it.
None. There's no diversity, and there's no flaws.
That's right.
Because computers, at least so far right now, they don't handle flaws very well.
Right.
Right. A flaw in logic in a computer is usually fatal, in the sense that but it isn't in humans.
Right.
It's what's amazing about this. Humans, if we compare, this goes back to what we were saying, if we compare a computer with a human being and say, let's compare how they retain information, right? What we call memory.
Mm-hmm.
Well, humans have terrible memory.
Terrible.
Horrible memory. Computers have fantastic memory, right? As long as there's power. Perfect memory, amazing memory and ability to keep it.
And if it isn't, we'll figure out how to make it.
Yeah, it's just incredible memory. The system depends on it. Processing. Human beings are very bad at logic processing. Very, very bad.
Mm-hmm.
Even ones trained in logic aren't very good. Computers are fantastic at it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely fantastic at that. And yet I think it is those flaws. It is those very shortcomings where our creativity comes from. Imagine if every time Picasso changed his method, every artist in the world immediately was privy to that and had the exact same knowledge and ability to also paint that.
Right.
Well, there would be no Picasso.
Right. Or there'd only be one, and we'd never get anything.
But there would be
Picasso.
there'd be nothing to put it up against.
That's right.
So then it would be like, we have this art, but every artist in the world, if you want to call him an artist, I mean, it's hard to call that an artist. Every possible person with a brush in their hand in the world would paint the exact same painting that he did.
Right.
It's at such a quick succession, it would be very hard to know who even did it first.
Right. And so when we think of computers and creativity, the question is, or some of the discussion has been, could the computer create that piece of artwork? And the answer is yes, the computer could create that piece of artwork. If you gave it enough samples of similar kinds of art and said, now create something different for me, it could combine samples of all those different kinds of art and produce that artwork.
Well, that's
not a problem. But that's really just an algorithmic approach to something it already knows.
Right. They just real quick. On that same one of those same podcasts I just listened to, they played a sampling of music that computers created, copying Jimi Hendrix and I don't remember who else. A couple other very well-known artists, singers, musicians, and it sounded like them. But that's the point.
But that's the point.
It sounded like Jimi Hendrix. It sounded like Lady Gaga or whoever it was. I can't remember now who it was. It did not sound like, it wasn't like, oh, wow, I've never heard that before. That's incredible art.
Right. And if we never gave music to a computer, would any computer ever create music? Right? If computers knew all the math, let's assume that the network of computers, we remove all music from the network of computers. And they all know math. They all know acoustics because they know science. They know all of that stuff. Would they ever write a symphony? And the answer is no. Unless we told them to write a symphony and we told them what a symphony was and how symphonies work and we gave them samples of it. Because that basic component that we have to have, which isn't even, maybe it serves as the basis of creativity. It's that want, that desire that need.
But let me ask you this. So let me test that. Let me push on that a little bit.
Yeah.
So what we could do with a computer is we could tell the computer, show it, this is music. These are all the kinds of music that exist. And we want you to be free to come up with any type of music that you can come up with. And it would then run all these different, but basically I saw like movies that were written by computer scripts. And of course, they're just complete nonsense of they're saying all, but it can't put together all these words, right? And basically what it's doing is it's just running iterations and iterations against samples that it's learned from, right? Is there any difference between that and what human beings are doing when they're being creative? So when, like Beethoven, he hears all music that he's heard up to that point, and then he says, I want to come up with something different. Is he doing anything different than just a slow and limited version of the computer, which is just throwing stuff against the wall until it sticks?
Well, sure. And let me take that a step further. Hearing sounds, we want to create something that produces sounds, but not just sounds. It's like listening to a mockingbird and listening to a grackle or a crow. We don't make instruments that sound like a crow because we don't like that sound. We make instruments that sound like a mockingbird, right? And we then take these sounds and say, now, can I rearrange these into something that no mockingbird would ever have sung, but it's long enough to satisfy this desire I have to hear these sweet sounds, these sounds that are sweet to me. And so I can arrange them into this thing, we'll call it a song, right? And it's, but that's fine. But nobody told us to do that. Nobody said, go do this thing. We did it. Why? Because we have a need. We have a need for beauty. We paint things on the inside of caves. Why? Because we have a need for it. Where did that need come from? It didn't arise from our intelligence. But when we think of intelligent, we go back and we say, this is where man began to become intelligent. Because we see something there. And that's a mark of intelligence for us. No computer's ever going to have that. Ever.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine that being possible because I personally don't think that human beings create in the way computers will create. That they're simply trying all possible combinations.
Right.
I think we try a lot of combinations because I think we're looking for something specific.
Yes.
Right.
But creativity isn't the same thing as looking for something specific.
Well, what I mean is we're looking for something specific in the sense you were talking about, in that it's something that speaks to me.
Yes.
There's something, I hear a voice in my mind and I want to hear that in whatever I'm creating, whether that's art or music or, like me building things or whatever. I have a vision in my mind of something I want to see. And I may not, and I don't know the path to it, but I know where I'm going.
Right.
Right. If I write anything, I know when it sounds the way I wanted it to sound.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Whereas a computer, I'm not convinced has, again, going back to, I think it's a will. I have a will.
No will. Yes.
Yeah, I think that is a will, a creative will. And I don't see how computers have that.
And they can't. Because we don't know what it is. We can only create what we know. Right, we can create a computer because we can look at our brain and we can say, this is how we think, this is logic, this is how it works, this is that. We can create what we can analyze, right? We can do that we can create that into a computer, but we don't know how our will works. We don't know why we have a will. We look at all of life and it's simply there, and we just don't even. We don't even like. This is really funny to me that I end up with we end up with a lot of expressions that are clearly not the case, right? That, for instance, we say, the planets are revolving around the sun, And what keeps them revolving around the sun? Because as the planet is spinning around the sun, it wants to continue in a straight line around there, but something keeps pulling it back to make it a curved line around there. Well, the planet doesn't want anything.
Yeah, I think that's hilarious too. It's the same way with evolutionists. They
Yes.
talk about things evolution wants.
Right.
Right? What nature wants, as if it wants anything.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't want anything at all. It doesn't even want nothing.
Right, exactly. Exactly. We have wants. We have a will.
Which is why we phrase it that way, because we comprehend that.
That we comprehend.
Right? If we think of it in the context of ourselves, it would be what we want. We want to do this. We have the will. All our we couch it in that language, and it's not just laymen.
It's not.
I listen to highly trained scientists
Yes.
and evolutionary scientists who speak of evolution in terms of a Calvinist
Yes.
and of an Arminianist.
Yes.
You would think you were if you would take that discussion everything and just put all that
All
that
their
context
statements in religious
into
context.
religious words,
Yes.
you would think you're listening to a Calvinist debating an Arminianist.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And we can't think past it. It's not possible, but we can't impart it. We can't impart it to a computer. We don't know how. We can't analyze. It is so ubiquitous to us that we can't get along without thinking that way, but we cannot analyze it in any way. It's beyond our analysis.
There's a quote I was reading. I'm going to get it wrong because I have such a terrible memory.
Well, yeah, because you're not a computer.
Yeah, exactly, and I'm worse than that. I'm not even a good human. I'm lousy as a human for memory.
That has been discussed before.
Yes, but it's something like observing the irony of a mind trying to build a mind, but not being able to comprehend what a mind even is.
Yes.
It's a quote that goes it's an famous AI quote.
Yes.
I've butchered it completely. Apologies to whoever said it.
Right.
But it's something to the gist of the irony of a mind wanting to build a mind without being able to even understand what his own mind is.
That's right. That's right. Right. There was a movie a few years back, and I think it was called The Prestige.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember it?
A magic movie?
A magic movie,
Yeah,
right?
I like
And
that movie.
And it was about
Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale.
Yeah, maybe that wasn't. It was, but it was a magic movie, and it had Michael Caine in it. Is that the right one?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And the guy had a machine that would duplicate himself.
Yes.
Okay, that was it. And he makes a statement in there. He says it was a terrible thought every night, not to know which one you would be, the one who walks out on the balcony, or the one who drowns in the container, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the problem. This is a great way to phrase the problem, right? How would I know? Like Kurzweil thinks one day we'll be able to transfer our consciousness into a computer. Really? How would you know?
Yeah.
Right?
How would you know you didn't already do it?
Yeah, right.
Which goes back to the simulation idea.
Let's go back to the simulation idea. But I have a pretty good idea how I know that my brain didn't get transferred to a computer. The computer didn't initially try to kill me. This is a pretty good evidence that my brain is not in that computer. Because if I met me somewhere, I would dislike me intensely immediately, want to kill me. And if the computer isn't feeling that, then it's not getting bothered at all. So it doesn't have my mind in it, right?
Yeah.
But what a great tool to get rid of some population. Let's convince them that we've uploaded their mind into the computer.
That's terrible.
Let the computer tell them it really worked. Yes, I'm here. I'm you. Yeah, look, I remember when you did this. No, I have all these memories. Yes, you can go ahead and dispose of your biological body now because you're actually in the computer. Okay, let's do it. And don't think that story hasn't been written.
Yeah. You know, a lot of people are quite afraid of the idea of AI, Christians and non-Christians,
Yes.
thinking that if we come up with AI, then then its next step is going to be to eradicate us, because especially if you're a non-Christian, you believe human beings are essentially nothing better than animals, and many times, and in the case of modern humans, they believe them to essentially be viruses on the face of the earth, ruining
Kind of the
nature.
Matrix view of things.
Yeah, exactly, and that any logical and intelligent machine would immediately eradicate us as being the source of all of Earth's problems.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, not going to happen. But that doesn't scare me, because that's not going to happen. But what does scare me is the idea that we could create an expert system that was trained in science well enough, and then somebody would instruct it to get rid of us.
well, that's where I was going with. That's where I was going with this, exactly. So we essentially, I mean, those that are afraid of this have a point in that we're basically living that now in a small degree, right? We have AI is powering, the AI as it is at the time is powering the algorithms that decide what gets posted, what gets seen, what social media is visible, what gets banned. All of that is done. People think that, the Zuckerberg or whoever, Dorsey or whoever they think is sitting there at a computer reading every tweet and post and deciding, I don't like what you just said. That is not, that's not at all what's happening. Nobody's reading them for the most part. This is all getting run through algorithms and being identified based on, things that probably not a single one person could explain how the decision's being made. That's the thing about the AI as it is now. And this is what I think confuses people as to how intelligent it actually is. They say, because they say, well, they'll tell you, no one person understands how it works.
That's right.
That doesn't mean that people didn't make it or that it made itself. It just is, again, goes back. It's the product of a collective intelligence, human intelligence, that a single individual human doesn't know. We don't know why it does what it does.
Right.
It's so deep, it's so huge, and it's drawing from data that's so wide that you can't look into code like you can and debug it. It doesn't work that way.
That's right.
It doesn't work that way. But
unfortunately, that doesn't mean that it wasn't programmed with a worldview.
Exactly.
And the algorithm is enforcing a worldview that it was programmed with.
That's right. And so, going back to what I was saying, exactly right. We are, in many ways, living that dystopian reality.
Yes.
Where the computer, and in quotes, in air quotes, where the computer is virtually killing off people it deems dangerous, right? In the virtual world.
Right. It has become an efficient big brother.
Yes. But the problem is not the system.
No.
It's not that computers have become intelligent and decided, I don't like this speech or I don't like this thought. It's simply doing what it's been programmed to do.
That's right. That's right. And that's the thing that I fear more, right? Because if someone actually said, I don't know that they would, eliminate humanity because we're the virus on the earth that's ruining it, right? The computer would execute that even if it meant that it would eventually run out of power and die. It has no sense of self-preservation. It would kill off all of humanity in doing that. And it could do it very efficiently because it knows everything we're toxic to, and it knows all the medical problems it could create. It knows all the ways to make explosives and munitions, and it could be very efficient. And if it could get control of something in the physical world, right now it doesn't. Right now what it controls is what's on the screen, and it's just information. Computers really work in the information space, right? There are a few factories around the world that are basically run by computers and robots, and the computers could reprogram the robots but there are very few of those.
Yeah, and those robots aren't what people envision them. They're not walking around. They're stationary arms that do this. I mean, they're not going to walk out of the factory
or they're turtles that move things around.
Yeah, they're not walking out of the factory or rolling out of the factory and go hunting people. That doesn't work.
No, I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking of a computer repurposing the factory and turning it into a munitions center for destroying mankind, or convert the factory essentially into a very large bomb and destroying a whole city or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That theoretically could be possible if somebody programmed a computer to do that, but
And provided the raw materials necessary for it to
well,
happen.
in most like an automobile factory, you probably have the raw materials to do that.
No.
Oh, yeah, most likely.
There's nothing combustible in there.
There's plenty of combustible things in there.
What?
There's plenty of
They don't put gas in there.
there's plenty of cutting oils, and you can create aluminum dust and iron oxide and create thermite reactions. There's a lot that if you had unlimited scientific knowledge like a computer might have access to,
I have to look into that.
there's an immense amount that you could actually do with something like that. The problem is it's owned by somebody. And we have firewalls there to prevent external manipulation of the code and execution of code from outside. Could a computer intent on killing humanity eventually crack all our firewalls and make it through? Sure, it could, right? I mean, I can imagine a million bad scenarios. There's a million bad things that could happen if somebody could get to a intelligent enough computer and program it to do that, and have it work to reprogram all the other computers in the world to bend to its will to do that very same thing, right? That isn't my biggest fear. My biggest fear would be George Orwell's fear, that what the computer actually ends up doing over time is shrinking that epistemic bubble back to its size, removing the words and thought patterns from all of our electronic books. Just modify the text and remove it and shrink it down, get it to the point where we actually can't think those advanced thoughts. Like, you consider the founding fathers of the United States, what we consider our founding fathers. Those men were highly educated. They understood philosophy and science. They understood politics and sociology. They were very well educated people. And they thought through the problem of human government from 100 different angles, and they had very clear history laying out in front of them. So when they made our form of government, they made it from a very informed perspective. They weren't amateurs, right? They knew what they were doing when they thought through that thing. And if you were to somehow edit our knowledge base and dumb us down, just look at the average college graduate today, right? He gets a lot of history from some absolute idiot like Howard Zinn, whose book should be put up as an example of, here's how to make a history book that actually reflects nothing in history and is absolute garbage, right? And let's stick it up there. But they're being taught that stuff, so that in their mind, Christopher Columbus is an evil man who did all these evil things, almost cut people's hands off and cut their noses off and did all this evil stuff, all of which happened after he died. But they don't know that because they think they've read the record because Howard Zinn quoted pieces of the record to them. If you had a computer that just slowly, it could just wear down our knowledge base, and it gets to that point where Orwell describes it as, it's not so much that they made it illegal to think that, they made it impossible to think those thoughts. That I fear. That I see is more of a realistic, what's happening with the algorithms that we see on Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and all that kind of stuff is I actually see that happen.
But that's more a function of people and not computers. Computers only being a tool to implement such a thing.
Yeah, but that's my point. It's
right.
It's doing it on an information base.
Right.
I'm not worried about it making a factory that can blow us up, or guns and robots that could take us over like a movie. I'm more worried about it editing the information down to stupidity for us.
No, I get that. And what I'm adding to that is mainly going back to what we just were talking about, that those that fear AI, I think they're fearing the wrong thing. Yes. They're fearing the computers as if the computer itself was the danger, as opposed to those that have the control of this system.
Yes.
Is the problem.
Yes.
Right. The same way they should be fearful of another system that preceded the computers, which is like law, right? Law is a system that has it, that in many ways has a mind of its own, has
Yes.
a power of its own.
Yes.
It's what all these Hollywood movies. They always, I hate. I don't say I hate, but I find a lot of fault in the way Hollywood portrays any type of like police
Yeah.
situation, as if there's this one policeman who has this burning desire to solve a crime and thinks about it all. And I've talked to some policemen, and that's essentially not true.
Right.
Right. When you're a criminal, you are not going mano a mano
No.
with a policeman.
No.
You're going against a system
Yeah.
that works tirelessly day and night,
Yes.
24 hours a day, all day, has infinite resources. That's what you're fighting.
Right.
You're fighting a system.
The old illustration was that the wheels of justice turn very slowly, but they grind infinitely small.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is that system, it isn't fast, but it moves. And when it does,
Yeah. It's not fast. It's not efficient.
it's
right?
not efficient.
It seems like at times it won't. But if you kill somebody, that system is looking for you
Yes.
for the rest of your life.
For the rest of forever.
If everybody in the system has forgotten you, the system is looking for you.
Look, we still have pieces of the system trying to solve Jack the Ripper.
Yes.
Right? Exactly. Forever.
Right.
It's forever. We're going to look for that forever.
That's right. And what happened, like for instance, in this is, it seemed like, okay, they're doing that. They have fingerprints. They have this. Fingerprints came out. That was like all of a sudden the system all of a sudden reached way back in time with fingerprints
Yes.
and grabbed people that thought they'd gotten away.
That's right.
And then they're like, okay, we finally figured out. Then DNA comes out.
Yeah.
And it's like now we can reach back into almost prehistoric times.
That's right.
And solve crimes.
That's
and
right.
the system, like you say, is still. And what if they come out with something better than DNA?
Right.
All of a sudden, they can go back and they can like catalog and they know exactly who Jack the Ripper is.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Don't you know that family's changing their name from Ripper? Mr. and Mrs. Ripper.
Just like you don't find any Hitlers running around.
No.
Right?
No. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but my point is, we have this system, right? For the law. The law is a system that is, and you think, well, the law hates me. Well, actually, the law could be either way.
Doesn't matter.
If you're in a society where it has been designed to persecute the just,
Yes.
right, then it'll look like it's a system that's wrong.
Right.
It isn't. It's the people who have set it up, parameterized it, programmed it, if you
Yes.
will, set goals to it, and the system runs in that direction.
Yes.
It's like setting up a big boulder and getting it there and rolling it down a hill.
Yes.
And then say, the boulder's against me. Well, no, not exactly.
Right.
And so the idea that AI itself is a problem, that is, I think, a terrible misconception. And it's typical of our Hollywood-driven mindset of what we think reality is.
Right.
Right? That we think the AI is evil, when reality it is big tech, big government, big regulation. I think, my opinion, these things that have parameterized
Yes.
what we call AI,
Yeah.
and they're the problem.
And not necessarily conspiratorially.
No, not for the most part.
No.
Although it's getting harder and harder to think it's not that.
To disprove that.
Yes, it is, right?
I know it is.
As they are making decisions that seem to fit no, if they seem to fit no reality that I can identify anymore. Like companies making decisions to alienate for at least 40% of their customer base in this country.
Right.
I'm not an economist, but the economist loving part of me would have thought that would never happen.
Right.
That the invisible hand would never allow for any major corporation, let alone a series of them, to ever alienate any 40%.
Right.
No matter who they were, no matter what opinions they held, no way.
Right.
And yet here we are.
And yet here we are. That's right.
So it's getting real hard not to be a conspiracy theorist.
No, in my mind, so I want to take it out of this realm for just a second. I want to put it in another realm. When we think of a system, itself, there are various kinds of systems, of course, and there are various parts of systems theory. One part of system theory is what's referred to as viable systems theory. And there's a set of principles in viable systems theory that we didn't invent, we derived by looking at living systems. And we said all living systems tend to be this way. And if you're going to build a system and it's going to have to exist kind of on its own, it really needs to manifest these very same kinds of attributes, right? And we can't actually make a system, or we have been ineffective at making systems that match all those attributes, right? It's like an engine in a Carnot cycle. We can't make an engine that actually matches a perfect Carnot cycle. It's an ideal cycle, and none of them ever get there, right? And the same thing is true with viable systems. We can't actually make a system that's completely viable, but there are some principles we can pick out of it. And we make our systems more or less viable based upon how many of those principles we can hit in a single system. And without going into a whole lot of the details, there's one part that I think is really important, and that part is truly viable systems have this one quality that is that seems to be irreducible, and that is they are intrinsically resistant to change. So think of it this way. If you were to just take a pin and prick the end of your finger, your body would react to it. It wouldn't require a conscious effort on your part. You wouldn't think, should I react to that or not? Your body would. And it does that because change is being forced on it from the outside, and it doesn't want to accept that. It wants to do something. It wants to maintain itself, right? When we look at an enterprise, a company, or an economy, these things tend to display this quality of a viable system. When you have a viable economy, it wants to be resistant to change. It does not want people to fiddle with it deliberately, right? So when we have somebody like the Fed, who really has like this whole cockpit is absolutely blank, and they have one switch they can pull, and that's it. All they can do is up or down, that one switch. That's all. That's the only thing they can do with that one switch. That's the pure power of the Fed, right? That's all they got, one switch. And it turns out that no matter what they do with that switch, it's always wrong. And why is that? Because the whole system reacts against their attempt to manipulate it from the outside of the system. If we raise the interest rate, the economy reacts, and it does it with inflation. And if we lower the interest rate, bonds start to rebel against that, and we end up, and I'm giving them human will and attribute.
Sure.
You understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, exactly.
Right? So we have this problem that no matter which way they flip that switch, the system is going to react against the flipping of the switch, no matter which way they turn it, right? It's almost like you could say they don't have a good solution to any problem because they only have one switch they can pull. But actually, it's the nature of the system itself. The closer it is to a viable system, the more resistant it is to change from the outside world. And one of the reasons that I look at computers and I think we're not anywhere near a viable system with computers yet is because they don't display that quality. They are not resistant to change from the outside. In fact, they accept change from the outside as a matter of course.
That's interesting.
Change my code base, no problem. I don't say, oh, Microsoft has an update. No, you're disconnected. You know,
no, I actually have heard computers yell like that. I actually have heard that cry of desperation.
Yeah. You hear that all the time in the Apple factory when they're about to stamp that logo on top. No, don't make me one of those.
Oh, that's funny. But no, that is a very good point. I like that.
Right. So I don't see that threat. I don't see that problem. But also, that does make it harder not to see this as a conspiracy because I see a system set up in place and it's becoming very resistant to change. Right. It's odd that you can get somebody like AOC who can say absolutely the stupidest things a human being could say about an economy, could display absolute abject ignorance about how an economy works and what it does. And yet she can be covered so pleasingly in the press, so applaudingly by the press. You can get somebody who has a long political track record of abject lies and complete fabrications, and they can hold high office, and the press can treat them kindly. And it's hard not to believe that somehow that's all one viable system. And if it's one viable system, it's by the definition of conspiracy. And it's very hard. Like, you are a conspiracy internally to yourself. That's what defines you as separate from other systems. All right? You are internally that way. And we try to overcome that. This gets onto another interesting topic, and I know, how are we doing?
No,
on
we're
time?
good. We're fine.
Because
now.
you mentioned in when we first talked about this session, the idea of the chimera and the human monkey chimera, and how all that, what that looks like on the horizon, things like that. Do you know where that originated from?
I don't. I don't.
So nobody's actually trying to build a chimera. I saw it in the press today. Science, one step closer to making a human monkey chimera. Nobody wants to make a human monkey chimera. We're not even trying to solve that problem. No scientist wants to solve that problem because it's not a problem. What would you get if you made a human monkey chimera? A dumb monkey, right? The first really dumb monkey in the world you would get if you did that. It reminds me of that old joke. I don't know if it's actually a true historical incident or not, but it's because it's often told as a joke, that Marilyn Monroe one time met Albert Einstein and said, we should have babies because with my body and your brains, wow, they'd be unstoppable. And Einstein said, no, I don't think I'm up for that, because with my luck, they'd come out with my body and your brains, and then where would we be?
Yeah.
Right. But what are you going to get if you make a human monkey chimera? But that's not the problem we're trying to solve. No, there's a problem there that a scientist would be interested in solving, right? Let me tell you what happened with that and why we're there. Just
so everyone knows, in case those that are listening or don't know, we're talking. They should, but in the news, it just came out that they had developed embryos that were part human, part monkey.
Right.
They weren't. Those embryos never
were implanted in anything.
No, it just was an embryo. They studied it, and that was all. But that's what they're talking about.
That's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the problem they're actually trying to solve here, and why they're going down the path that they're going down, and why I think it's actually a good path to go down. Now, I know there's a whole bunch of Christians around the world who just suddenly, how could you say such a thing? So let's talk about what happened. We had a patient, and this patient had a plethora of health problems and eventually needed an organ transplant. Now, when you transplant an organ from one patient to another patient, no matter how close a match they are, you have introduced a world of problems. The body will not maintain that organ the way it maintains its own natural organs. And the organ will not maintain itself within the body the same way it would maintain itself within the original body. So from day one, you've got problems. Furthermore, they tend to war against each other. And so we have anti-rejection drugs and all that kind of stuff. Well, we had a patient who had an organ transplant, kidney transplant, in fact, and later on had complications due to another disease. And it was necessary to use some very strong antiretroviral and other chemotherapy to essentially shut down this patient's immune system. And they shut it down to nothing for a time in order to kill off some cancer cells. When they brought it back up, he suddenly reacted badly to the anti-rejection meds. And so they began to back the dosage off until they found out that somehow in resetting his immune system, the kidney recognized the body as its own, and the body recognized the kidney as its own. And suddenly, the body was maintaining the kidney, and the kidney was doing its own self-maintenance, and there was no conflict between the two again. Now, if we could solve that problem and reproduce that in other patients, wow!
So how does the chimera thing work into that? How is that part of that?
Because when we look at an embryo, we're looking at the most basic form of base cells.
Of organism.
Yeah, and of base cells.
Okay.
Right? Because these are non-specialized in any form at this point. And so if we took very primitive base cells from a human being and we put them in there, and if they could somehow learn to get along, and then we could analyze, because what we don't want to do is go to this patient who now has a functioning kidney that doesn't have to be on antiviral injection and say, hey, you are unique. So here's what we're going to do, okay? We're going to cut you open and find out how come it works this way, right? We know this guy's already been through enough. Let's not put him through that, right? Sorry. So what we want to do is we want to recreate that scenario so that we can figure out how to reliably solve that problem. We can make the cells from one body communicate with the cells from another body as though they belong together always, right? Because that would solve that problem for us.
Right.
So we put these together that way, and lo and behold, they took. They learned to communicate with each other along proton and protein pathways, as though they were meant to be together. Now what we could do is we could extract those cells and say, what's different between this one and the ones we originally put in there? And let's see if we can figure out how to trigger that somehow or another. So when we do these organ transplants, we don't have organs degrading from day one. We have patients who don't need anti-rejection drugs and all the complications that come from that on the side, which is partly an immune system deficiency that we've created because we gave them this organ, right? So how could we solve that problem? That's the problem they're trying to solve with it. They have no interest in creating something that's half ape and half human, right? I mean, what's the value of that? There's no economic value in
yeah,
anything,
no, I
right?
see what you're saying, and it is true. I mean, I read the article, and it wasn't near what the clickbait title was about, right? But the outcry by the religious wing of society is huge. I mean, they're crying ethics, and they got all these, very up in arms over this thing.
So I believe we ought to answer some ethical questions about it. I don't think we ought to do any science without some ethics that we're trying to answer to along the way. But it's not what they're thinking it is. To begin with, it wasn't a human embryo, and we didn't start with a human's, semen or egg to do this thing. We took basal cells from a living human and we put them in there. We didn't start with even a human embryo, I don't think. We started with human basal cells and put them in there. And there isn't a Christian in the world who would, if we used that to solve the problem with transplanted organs, there isn't a Christian in the world who's going to say, don't give me a kidney transplant. No way, because you're going to use that thing you got from there, right? No, I don't want that. No. They'd be like, okay, give me an organ transplant and make it so I don't have to take anti-rejection drugs, right? We'd all love that solution.
Right.
But we're so afraid that somebody's messing with something somewhere that they shouldn't be that we're going to call them out on it. And this isn't the problem. No, there are plenty of problems out there, right?
What is the argument? I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'm not. I'm not sure what the ethical argument against this is. I mean, I read that the Catholic Church, and I'm sure Protestant denominations, there's some of them, I don't know, I wouldn't know which ones, so I'm not going to say there are, but I would seem to think that there's probably some Protestants out there that take issue with what's been done here, what science is doing in this point. But I don't understand what the ethical argument or opposition is to this.
I don't think they understand what their ethical argument or opposition is either. I think they are assuming that this is the destruction of a human being.
You think it's that, or you think it's that they're saying that somebody's playing God?
I don't know.
Or do you think that this has something to do with some opposition to like biological evolution?
No, I don't think it has any. It arises out of an opposition to biological evolution. I don't think it arises from there at all. Um, and and that's an interesting argument when it's brought out. But I don't think this is that. I think this is they're actually thinking that these are human embryos that somebody is creating in the lab, and they're messing with cross speciation because they want to create a super species
But even
and
if that were true, I mean, I don't understand the ethical problem with that.
creating a super species
Sure.
out of that. I'm not sure I do either.
I mean,
Um,
I don't know that monkey and human is the right combination to even attempt such a thing. If that, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, we're going to have a
yeah.
super species of long arms and no thumbs. I don't-
Yeah, I'm not.
or or opposable toes. I don't know. I don't get it.
I
I'm
don't.
not sure I understand I don't understand the ethical problem with this. Not
I'm
that
not sure I do either.
not that I do understand to say, hey, let's take a moment and think about if there's an ethical problem.
Now that I agree with.
Right? Let's take a moment. Let's make sure there's no ethical issues here. I assume that if this was done anywhere in the U.S. or Europe, I forget where it was done, that was already has been done. I don't think that they can legally do anything of that magnitude
Oh, I think so
without
because
going through ethics boards.
this isn't a human embryonic experiment. They didn't start with human embryos.
I realize that, but I'm pretty sure that any of those things, even if it's not legal or legal issues, I'm pretty sure in the U.S. and Europe, they would have to gone through peer review type ethics boards dealing with any of that stuff.
No, that's quite possible.
Just for the funding
Yeah.
things, whoever's providing the funding would want to see that. I mean, you can't build a highway without an
Oh my
impact
goodness.
study, right? So,
It's insane.
right. So now if it was done in China, well, then it's all up in the air. Who knows? I mean,
Yeah, I don't think it was Chinese.
yeah,
I don't remember where it was done either.
I forgot.
Because in my mind, I didn't see an ethical problem with it.
Right.
Because knowing what they were starting with and where they were going to with this thing, which was how do we get the cells of one body to communicate with the cells of another as though they were part of each other, that to me that is like, man, that is worth going for. That is a goal worth solving, right? Problem worth solving. So I didn't see an ethical issue with it.
Right.
And I'm not sure what people saw. I think people see ghosts in these things. I think people misunderstand scientists. They clearly misunderstand science because they keep saying stupid things about it, like follow the science, right? That's like chase your tail. This is not even a sensible thing to say. Believe the experts. That's the dumbest
Yeah.
thing
No, that's
anybody ever said, right?
Yes, that's completely ridiculous.
Completely ridiculous. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, and I'm not anti-Fauci, and I'm not anti-WHO or any of that stuff.
No, exactly. I am not either. That's why so many people, my friends, are angry at me because I'm not anti any of those things.
Any of those things.
But saying, believe the experts, it'd be a lot more accurate to say doubt the experts.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. And
Because the experts are wrong more often than they're right.
that's right.
They're just right a little more often than the average person is right.
No,
Yeah,
no,
they're a little more.
no, they're not.
You don't think so, huh?
No, they're not.
You think they're wrong more often than the average person?
I don't think they're any right or wrong any more often than the average person. I think they publish opinions more often than the average person, and therefore more often.
You haven't been on
they
Facebook then,
find
huh?
the right one. Predictions. How about that? Predictions. In fact, there's a whole study around experts and predictions and why the experts are often worse at it than the average person. And there's actually a proposition to have what they call prediction marketplaces, where because markets tend to be just a free market, watching it react and watch it tell the future. It's pretty good at telling its own future.
Well, that's kind of I mean, that's the whole premise behind the betting on elections,
That's right.
and that why some people follow that closer than polls, because
That's
for a
right.
number of reasons. But yeah, I mean that's the premise, right?
That's the premise.
That they're putting it on the market and they're putting money into it,
That's right.
and then they're seeing that as a predictor of outcome.
That's right. And it tends to be more accurate. And so there's a whole thing on the that the study of experts and why some are better than others and some are often really, really bad. But that's neither here or there. I think the issue with it is, though, that at any given time, expertise is incomplete. And follow the experts is actually a call to ignore your own reason. And I think that is always a bad course of events. I think what we should do is we should teach people to reason and evaluate things better. My son, who is, what's he like, 19 now, and is 6'4" and size 15 shoe, and he's a kid, and he's a young man, put it that way. He made this statement one time that I thought was one of the greatest statements. He said, "We need to stop studying languages in high school." He said it's completely worthless because any language you study in high school, if you're not using it, you're going to lose it before you do anything. I'll tell you what we should do. We should make everybody join the debate team. And everybody needs to learn how to reason and debate things. That would be better than teaching them a new language, because then they'd actually know how to talk to people and reason through this stuff instead of just smattering a bunch of garbage out there the way they're doing.
I would agree that courses like that are definitely needed. There's a number of courses that are needed that we're not teaching.
Right.
And it's because they're hard. And education, especially public education, is not about tackling the hard things. It's about trying to keep everyone from killing themselves in these schools.
Yeah, that's
is really what it's coming down to. And so going in and challenging these young people, these kids, with something like debate, philosophy, civics, that challenges worldviews and challenges ideas of inclusivity or ideas that those that promote inclusivity hold, would be a better way of saying it. Well, that's going to be a no-go in public schools.
I think it's a shame we don't teach my favorite courses in middle school and high school had absolutely nothing to do with anything I do now for a living. But, it was home ec, cooking, wood shop, machine shop, electricity, drafting. All those were fantastic classes. I loved all those classes. I don't do that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
But I loved learning it. I still cook. I can sew. I can turn things on a lathe, and I do a lot of woodworking. I can't wire a basic circuit. I lost that somewhere along the line for not using it. But I can recognize the basic elements of a circuit. And, those
Well, they're
great.
back to teaching that, actually. I work in a lot of schools, and they're putting in mechanic shops again. They're putting in pig farms. They're putting in
great.
all of that stuff. Like high school that your father-in-law went to.
Yeah.
Burbank.
Yeah.
Right. They had taken away all that stuff out of it, and now like 4 years ago, I was down there working, and we were putting all the bathroom stalls in the pig farm, the goat farm, the welding shop. All of these new high schools that you see built, they all have welding shops. They all have all of that stuff. They're going back to...
It's about time, because losing that was a dumb idea, whoever took that stuff away.
Yeah.
So, but let's get back to the other discussion for a minute, which is the discussion of biology and what's going on with some of the science stuff right now. Because I think it impacts... I think there's an intersection there between the artificial intelligence and the way we look at artificial intelligence and the way we look at science, right? Which is, we look at something like artificial intelligence and we think intelligence, because it's right there. Clearly, it's in the name, so there must be something there to it, right? Well, no, there isn't, and no, it's not intelligent. But but it can feel that way because it has instant recall and it's always perfect and has a huge database, bigger than anything you'll ever hope to have in your head. And because actually it beat everybody at Jeopardy, and it has, I mean, it has a tremendous amount of cool stuff to it. But no, it's still not you, and it's never going to be you, right? Um, so 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 get that out of the way. But but the way we view artificial intelligence is often the way we view science in our society. That whole chimera thing, right? We saw a title and we reacted to it. Um, when we actually investigate the science underneath, it turns out it had nothing to do with whatever it was they were saying in the title of this article, the clickbait title you called it, right?
Hmm.
It didn't have really anything to do with that at all. It really is a really important problem, and this is a really cool approach to solving it, right? Because I can mess with this, and I'm not actually messing with any embryo. Well, a monkey embryo. But we weren't going to let it live anyway because it was a chimera. We didn't really want a chimera, right? We just wanted it to solve this problem. It seems to be able to solve this problem for us. So let's figure out how it does that and see if we can make that work. I love this approach to it. And this is a great example of it. When we talk about science, what are we talking about? Right? What is this thing we call science? And it clearly isn't the word, because science means knowledge, and this isn't helping us get to what science is, right? We say, well, science is a method, right? Well, okay, that might be true too, but if so, that doesn't meet the definition of science, and it's actually more than that. So, what actually is science? And are we following it? Are we not following it? What are we doing? And the answer to that is something more along this line. Science is the best set of explanations we have for today, right now, for how the world works the way it works around us. Now, if we start with that as a definition of science, it automatically says, by the way, we don't think we have the final explanation of anything yet. And our explanation is subject to change. And by the way, it's based on the world that's around us. And so that kind of speaks to our perspective. And as our perspective changes, we may have to investigate new things and come to new knowledge. So if you're following me right now, don't be surprised if I tell you something different tomorrow than what I told you today. Because I don't think I have the final answer yet. This is just the best set of explanations I have right now for the way the world works as I see it right now. If any of those things change, my explanations are likely to change. And my explanations might be wrong. They're just the best ones I have right now.
Right.
They fit, right? When the explanation fits, I'm going to go with it until somebody challenges me and says, that explanation's not good anymore because you missed something. Okay, fine. And I'm not just going to roll over and say, okay, fine, I got it wrong. I'm going to say, prove it. Prove me wrong. And I'm going to make them jump through hoops and challenge it. And I'm going to argue with them about it as though I were absolutely dead certain I was right when I'm actually not. But if I don't challenge it, then you're just accepting the next thing that comes along, and you don't know that that's any better. So you really want to make sure that the explanation you have is really the best explanation. So the actual scientific method has nothing to do with peer-reviewed journals or peer-reviewed publications, because peer reviews, we've watched what peer review does, right? I mean, we've seen the recent, people scamming the peer review thing, right?
Yeah.
That whole thing. It has nothing to do with peer review. Peer review is nothing more than your peers voting, looking at it, thinking, I didn't find anything objectionable. This sounds pretty good. People are going to challenge it. Yeah, okay, good. But they may not, because it may not be the problem they're trying to solve. And they might not be interested in that explanation. You could put something out there in press that nobody challenges for a long time, but it's absolutely wrong, right? So the fact that it's in a peer-reviewed journal doesn't mean it was good science, and it doesn't mean it's the right explanation. It doesn't even mean it's a good explanation or a better explanation. Science is actually, what are the best explanations we have right now for how the world around us works the way it seems to work right now? That's all going to change. And if we're not willing to accept that, if we're going to get like so many Christians do, right? Like, yeah, the Word of God has never changed, but your science book, it changes
Yeah.
all the time. Oh, come on. What value is there in that? Of course, the Word of God doesn't change. And of course, the science books change. That doesn't mean science is wrong,
Yeah.
or that it's bad, or that you shouldn't care about it, or that.
Well, it's it's right, and it's a
I'm like lecturing, but
no, it's good, it's fine, but going to that, how would I put it? Science or scientific discoveries, and let's call them truths, theories is a better term,
Yes.
right? Scientific theories allow us to accomplish certain goals,
yes,
right? Without them, we wouldn't. So when we
That's
get
right.
Newton's theory of gravity, it
That's
allows us to accomplish certain goals that we couldn't have done if we hadn't understood gravity in that way, even if it's completely wrong
that's right.
in its technicalities. Einstein comes along, comes up with a different theory of gravity, which a lot of scientists are not thinking is actually true or right, but it allows us to accomplish other goals
That's right.
that we were not able to accomplish with
Right.
Newton's. We could not have accomplished
Right.
those with Newton's that we could accomplish with Einstein's view.
Right.
And if someone comes along with another one, it doesn't mean that it's right and the others are wrong.
No.
A lot of what science is, to kind of build on your explanation, is I would tweak it a little and say that it's the best explanation we have at the moment
Yes.
to accomplish the goals that we have in mind.
Right.
Right? Because in some case, it could be that Newton's is a better explanation than Einstein's, but not at accomplishing certain goals. There's some goals that would not be the best way to accomplish it by using Einsteinian formulas as opposed to Newton's.
Well,
It just depends what you're trying to do.
Well, yeah, most scientists would probably look at it a little bit differently than that. They would
Right.
say it's within a sphere, right? So you would look at Newton's explanation of gravity and say, well, within a macrosphere, a sphere at a macro scale, and you know what? That is a great explanation. It works perfectly within that sphere. Now, if I take that down into a micro scale, suddenly it falls apart and it doesn't work at that scale.
Right.
You need a different explanation of gravity.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
At
So
that
when your
scale.
goal is, if your goal at this moment is
Is in the macro.
is to get a plane
Yeah.
from Austin to Dallas, Newtonian physics is perfect. Right.
Absolutely perfect.
Right, and simple. If your object is to get, a large hadron collider working, well, then Newtonian physics isn't going to be the ticket.
Isn't
for
going to be
you.
useful.
No.
Right? It's not going to get you where you want to go.
Right.
Right? It's a different sphere. It's a different scale.
Right, and so going to your point, what I think too many Christians do when they look at science is they're conflating the utility of getting the physical world around us, understanding it for a certain utility, with theological truth,
Right.
right, and eternal consequence of it,
Yes.
and they're mixing these up,
Yes.
and so then they're playing them against each other.
Yes. When in fact there is no play.
Right.
There's nothing there.
Now, scientists and people and scientistics, or however you want to call them, people in love with science who don't know anything about it, and actual scientists have done a lot of their own harm. I mean, they've impaled themselves a lot on the sword,
Yeah.
and made Christians really skeptical of them because they see science as opposition to truth and to theology.
Right.
Not all of them.
Not all of them.
Not all of them, but there's been enough.
Right.
Right? Where science is the enemy of religion, is the enemy of faith,
Right.
is the enemy of the Bible.
Right. And which one came first of those is impossible for us to sort out at this point.
Well, it's like any tribal conflict.
Yes, that's
right. Who threw the first rock at the first ancestor? I don't know.
I don't know.
Right. To me, it's like the same issue with the Bible version issue.
Yeah.
Who started this fight? Was it the Westcott and Hort group? These over here, they had some pretty harsh things to say about the Texas Receptus. Or was it the Texas Receptus people who had some pretty harsh things to say about textual criticism? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But now we got this situation where we got this conflict between science and religion, if you want to call it
Yeah.
that, and people taking sides when it doesn't seem to me that for the most part there's any need for that.
No, there isn't. But I will say this, if I'm being a little more critical of our side for a moment,
Hmm.
because the religious side of society can be most critical of, being from the inside.
Right.
I think we agitate it far more than necessary because we have so many people who feel like they can insult scientists and the findings of science and who want to say dumb things like, yeah, that's all just too complicated for me. I just want to simply believe what God said and be done with it, right? And if you're disagreeing with what God said in his book, I'm happy to say you're wrong. And you might look right now, but eventually you'll be proven wrong because God is always right, right? And they just want to take that approach to it. And if I were not religious and I were a scientist, I would look at it and say, what an idiot. What an absolute moron. And
Well-
who are you? And let me prove you
Well,
wrong.
I'm not a scientist, and I am religious, and I still think that.
That's
What
an
a
absolute moron.
Yeah.
Something's wrong with that. Something's wrong with that approach to life.
Yes.
You wouldn't take that approach in anything else. You wouldn't say, well, I read the manual for the car. It didn't say anything about that kind of sign. So I'm going to handle that sign however I want to. And I'm just going to believe the owner's manual. And that's the only thing I'm going to worry about. And that's all I'm just going to worry about my owner's manual. Yeah, it's just like you wouldn't treat anything in life that way. You'd say, well, that was stupid. And who would do something like that? But people are doing it all the time with the
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah, and my big complaint with that whole line of reasoning come from let's say Christians, not just religious people, but let's talk about from the inside, from Christians, is that they're, in my opinion, they are seriously overvaluing their comprehension of the Bible, right?
No, really, just a little bit. Yeah.
I think I'm understating that a little.
I think you're understating.
Well,
it a
that's good.
little.
I'm usually accused of being extreme, so. No, I mean, they think that they are so convinced that they understand the Bible, even though they don't agree with anybody else on a whole lot of things.
Right.
But
Who
they
are Christians?
understand it.
Who are Christians
No, yeah.
who also claim that they understand and believe the
Yes,
Bible.
and they only believe the Bible. And
That's
yet there's all this disagreement. So apparently, some people are not believing the Bible.
Who say they are.
Who say they are, but it's not them. And it's like,
Yeah. It's never me. I'm not the problem. It's those people over there, right?
yeah.
And so, yeah. So if I were a scientist, I would have a tendency to want to attack those people for attacking me, and prove them wrong. And so I don't actually get upset with the scientists. Now, that's not the same thing as the atheists who have a worldview they're pushing, right? That's not,
Right.
That's
Okay,
a separate thing.
That's an important clarification I was about to make. That, and I do I agree. I think I agree with your position on this, and that is that as a Christian, I speak to Christianity first, and it's not in any way to say that even scientists, but especially the new atheists and such, are free of guilt.
No.
I mean, they're antagonistic to
Yes.
to religion, especially when we're talking about the new atheists.
Yes.
They are enemies not only of religion, they're enemies of morality, they're enemies of anything that is founded on spiritual truth. That is anathema to them.
That's right.
Right.
And I'm not talking about that.
Right.
I'm just talking about ordinary scientists who feel like I'm being attacked because I'm trying to solve this problem with organs being transplanted, and the whole world would be benefited if I can solve this problem for you. This is a problem where I could dedicate my whole life to solve this problem because this is a problem worth solving here, folks. And then all of a sudden I find out I'm being attacked by none other than, like, say, the Catholic Church and the Southern Baptist Convention and whoever else out there is pontificating, who wants to comment on this, who really has no concept of what's motivating me or why. I might slap
And many
you back.
have not done the research to know exactly what's going on.
Yes, yeah,
They've read some headlines.
That's right.
And that is another problem that, we're pointing out problems with us Christians is it's one of the things that I find value in the Catholic position. There's very few Catholic positions I find value in. One of them I find value in, even though I don't subscribe to it, but I think it highlights a problem in Christianity that needs to be considered, and I'm sure it has, because it's nothing new to me. I'm not inventing or innovating here, but there is a problem that Catholicism points out, and that is every Christian, every evangelical interprets the Bible for himself. It's our dogma, right? You don't need anybody to explain the Bible to you. You understand it all on your own. So every single head is its own world of interpretation. Where the Catholics don't do that. They don't believe it that way. They believe the Bible to be true, but it must be understood as it's interpreted within the tradition of the church.
Right.
Christians oversimplify that and say it means you have to do whatever Protestants, oversimplify that to make it mean you have to do whatever the Pope says, and that's not what that means.
No,
right?
I
It
agree.
means within the tradition of the church,
Right.
which goes all the way back, according to them, to Peter. Whatever. I'm not
Right.
arguing the point with them, and I'm not saying I agree with them on it.
Right.
I'm
Or
just
that I
saying-
disagree.
Or I do disagree with them to a
degree.
Yes, I do disagree, but I acknowledge that they're identifying an actual
Yes.
problem here.
Yes.
And the problem is, and this is what the Catholic Church observed and predicted with Martin Luther, was you're going to end up with every person will be their own church.
Mm-hmm.
And it's essentially what Christianity has come in a large part. Now,
Certainly.
we have maintained certain doctrines and orthodoxy for the most part.
Yes.
Salvation by grace
Yes.
and these things. The main one we've probably maintained is that everyone can interpret the Bible however they want.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet they would accuse Rome of being the great private interpreter.
Yes. Or the Orthodox, or these ones that don't do that.
Right.
And so I don't know the solution to this. I don't believe the solution is the Roman Catholic solution.
So I don't. First of all, that's a very good observation. I don't believe there's anybody that I know of who doesn't have some mixture of tradition in their interpretation of Scripture. We all have some sense of orthodoxy that we don't want to get outside of in our interpretation of Scripture. And there's value to that. I think there's a great deal of value to that. Science works the same way, by the way. So this isn't anything unique to us. I know that historically we have had some people who are relatively famous, like A.W. Pink, for instance, who was a very, very strong Calvinist and ended up not being able to go to any church, he said, because no church taught the gospel the right way. And yeah, every man is a church to himself. And I don't know that I have the answer to it, but I do have this. There was a time when we could actually tell the difference between conviction and doctrine. And we often, like the founding fathers referred to this, by the way, not the church, our national founding fathers referred to this as conscience. And that every man had to answer to his own conscience for it. And I believe that's a good doctrine in the New Testament as well, right? But we used to have that, and we didn't necessarily mark it as doctrine or interpretation. We allowed that there was a difference. Now, maybe that wasn't on a large scale, but yeah, I think even on a fairly large scale. That's why denominations didn't multiply. They didn't increase exponentially until later on. Because for a long time, you could be a member of a sect within Christianity and believe a significant number of things differently than other members of your sect, and they wouldn't kick you out, and you didn't feel a need to leave, and you didn't condemn them, and they didn't condemn you, because they could tell the difference between conviction and doctrine. And we've lost that.
It seems that that's been lost or has become, I don't know if it's been lost. I understand what you're saying. I would change that way of phrasing it, though, and say that it has become untenable. I think that in theory, we still have that. And everyone, it's like freedom of speech today in our
Right.
society. Everyone ascribes to it, nobody practices it,
Right.
right? Because it's become untenable. And I think it's
You
that
may be right.
I think that this issue has become untenable within Christianity because we have elevated things that were before would never be important doctrines to being critical doctrines.
That's right.
Our group, and I say our group, and I'm referring to the church, our church, Freeborn, the church that we're associated with, as well as the Brethren, all these churches that have the ideas of open meetings. So the local church,
Right.
all of these groups, right? The Plymouth Brethren offshoots really is what they are, right?
Yes.
So all the Plymouth Brethren offshoots have done this, in my opinion. We've taken things like the open meeting, what we call the name of Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and we've made that very important
Yes.
to where a church that doesn't see it in the way we do has in the words of I don't think we go as far as the recovery or the local church, but they're Babylon.
Yes.
And I think that many of us,
Mm-hmm.
and by us I mean these churches,
Mhm.
like the Plymouth, especially the closed ones, right? But the Plymouth, the local church, obviously, and even groups of churches of ours that we've been associated with, have elevated that and see it that way. They may not say it that way, but I think that by and large it's seen that way.
Yes.
That they are lesser Christians because they have the name Baptist on top of their door,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Or they don't have open meetings or whatever.
Right.
But there was a time when it was there was never really any argument about whether Christians could drink alcohol. For most of church history, this was never
well,
this
it's
was
still
never
that way everywhere
discussed.
but in the U.S. and Mexico,
But
actually.
but a few
I-
small countries like this, but a few areas where suddenly that is an issue and churches and people divide over it.
Well, you can be disciplined from churches for drinking,
Yes.
not
Even if
for
you-
not for
not for
drunkenness.
drunkenness.
No, yeah, or for even buying alcohol. I
That's
mean, in
right.
some places, yeah,
Right. Exactly.
or smoking cigarettes,
yes.
or dancing.
Yes.
Um,
Or any of these things that in themselves are not. How did that become a doctrine? How did that become a point of separation? How did this? Where did we lose conscience? Where did we lose conviction? Where did that go? Because to me, there was always this concept that a man had, and I say a man because I think of it in manly terms, but I understand it's not male. A person had this concept of sacred honor. And it was unique to me. My sacred honor to God, like, was special between God and me. And I didn't expect anybody else to live at that standard. In fact, I expected that standard was too hard for everybody else. God didn't expect for them to live at that standard. He expected me to, because I was the knight of the round table. I was the one called to that high calling, but not everybody else had to do that. Paul says it that way, right? Like, not everybody can be single like me. If you can do
Right.
it, I think it's great.
calls it a gift.
It's a gift, right? And suddenly we lost that, and now where somebody would say, I personally don't drink, and they would say it in a way that wasn't convicting to somebody else or condemning of anyone else. They said it in a way as, this is my relationship with the Lord, that I can't do that, right? Like the vow of a Nazarite. Everybody else got their hair cut in the country. The Nazarite didn't. Why? Because that was special between him and God,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
That's the way it used to be. When our founding fathers wrote that line, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's what they were talking about. And we've lost that in Christianity. The losing of that was no small loss. That was a large thing to lose and important. And we gave that up for these bodies of standards that are capriciously arbitrary, in my personal opinion. I don't think they're worth having as standards. But now we hold people to them and we discipline people for them. What if you want to call it discipline, right? Whatever you want to call it. We punish people in the church, essentially, for violating one of these standards that really was never a standard at all. It should have been a point of personal honor. And now we can't hold it. Now we can't hold up anyone as having this standard of honor and being an example to others who would want to live a life of honor like that. We can't do that anymore because instead we've gone to this, this lower level thing of having all these weird standards that we hold everybody to. If I had to label it, I'd say Pharisee.
Yeah. It seems to me that we've turned these points of conscience, as you say, into church identity.
Yes.
Right. So now it's not even that I consider it doctrinal for me, because you can say, because I don't see how you can get around that. Right. So if I have a conscience towards something, to me, it's doctrinal. Right. Very seldom will I ever say, well, I have a problem with drinking. I don't care if you do. I don't. And this is right. How I am personally on drinking. I don't drink.
Yeah.
I have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with anyone else drinking.
Right.
I have a problem with me drinking. And it's not a problem like I'm worried I'm going to get drunk, or that I'm like a white knuckle drunk. I never have been, not interested in it. I don't like the smell of it, but I have a doctrinal problem with it for me. I don't have a doctrinal problem with anyone else.
For me, doctrine means teaching, and I'm thinking of doctrine in the sense of what does the Bible actually teach us?
Well, see, I am too, and I look at the scriptures, and I see the scriptures teaching me personally, right, not to look at the wine in the glass and all the verses we know. Right. I don't see it prescribing that as a church identity.
Right.
But as a doctrine, and that's how I take it. And so and if anyone asks me, should I drink? I would tell them, I don't think you should.
Yeah, I would
I have no problem with saying that.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a judgment. It's not a condemnation.
Right.
But if they're going to ask me,
I
will tell them, I don't think you should drink. I think it's very unwise. Yeah. And I take that as a doctrinal position.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't mean that I think that they are biblically wrong to do so.
Right.
Right?
Or in sin.
Just like Paul, or
necessarily even foolish in doing so.
Correct. Exactly right. Beyond my opinion of it.
That's
to
right.
me, this is the same way Paul had a doctrine of not marrying. You use this example. This was doctrinal.
For him.
It was exactly. But it was doctrinal. It's in the scriptures. It's hard to not call it doctrine, right? But he also said it's not for everybody.
That's right.
So you can have a doctrine that's not for everybody.
Yes.
See, I don't think Christians get that.
I think
many Christians don't get they think if it's doctrinal, it's mandatory.
It's
if
universal.
it's doctrinal, it's universal. Paul had a doctrine that he said himself was not for everybody.
Yes.
And so that's how I see it. So what I think has become, to tweak a little bit, what I agree with what you're saying, I do, but to tweak it a little bit is I think that what has happened is we've turned all of these elements into church identities.
Yes.
Into de facto denomination.
Yes.
This is our denomination. Name of Jesus. This is our denomination. No drinking. This is our denomination. Don't play with cards. Can't play face cards. That was in my family when I was growing up.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to play any game that used face cards because that was sin. And it was not allowed. We could not have face cards at the family reunion. So,
I get it. Yeah. I know that.
You know that denomination.
I know that denomination well.
Yeah, it's turned into being that's what our church identity is.
Yes.
I'd say I don't mean I'm not throwing stones at anyone. This is in my mind, this is Christianity en masse.
Yes.
At large.
Yes.
All Protestantism essentially.
Yes.
Has turned
I agree.
The identity of your church of the church into the do's and don'ts of the individuals.
Yes. Pharisaism.
Yes.
Which is a real which causes everyone on the outside to look at it and say, you guys aren't even reasonable. Why would I reason with you about anything? You're not reasonable. And it looks like that from because those things are arbitrary.
Yeah.
They don't make any sense. What is sensible of having that as an identity? We're the church that doesn't drink. So what? Who cares? Why does that mark you as anything? Right? Right? We meet only in the name of Jesus. Tell me somebody who doesn't.
Well, yeah.
Tell me a church who doesn't, right?
And
That's the way they're looking at it.
that's where you get into the
We don't celebrate
Pharisaical.
Easter. Are you a Christian?
Yeah.
Are you sure you're a Christian?
That's where we get into the I think the realm of Pharisaicalness, in that we separate from other churches based on these private identities that we've
Yes.
established. So we're better, and I say we, and I mean me. I mean I lived this and inhabited this realm for years.
Yes.
So I'm not blaming anybody. This was I have firsthand experience with it, right? I identify this way and then look down on any other Christians who don't see it that way, who don't hold to this doctrine of whatever it is, whether it's the Bible version you're reading, whether it's the what name you have written over the top of the door, whether you're drinking, whether you smoke, whether you allow dancing, whether you have dating. I mean, there's like a plethora of these positions, right?
And they only get dumber the further you go, right?
Yeah.
Whether men have hair that exceeds their hairline.
Yeah.
Whether women have hair that doesn't.
Can you wear a hat in church?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You have to wear a hat in church.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of churches that, men's heel, the heel of their shoe cannot exceed a certain measurement.
Right.
And they're actually like measured. If there's in doubt, right? They come in, they'll measure them. Up north, there were churches where you couldn't use buttons. You had to use hook and loop. And I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. And what would be perfectly fine, although weird, for an individual to hold a view like that, right? I would look at that's kind of odd. I wonder where you got that from. But, like whatever.
Yeah, right.
All of a sudden, now is this abhorrent identity where this church is now, as a church, we're going to identify ourselves with whatever it is of these things we're talking about. And it seems to me that it's an enemy of actual holiness.
Yes, it is.
I think it distracts us. It's a huge mind suck or spirit suck.
Yes.
Right? Sucking up all available energy into these externalities, right, that are not even prescribed.
Yes.
When we should be focusing primarily on the spiritual element, the internal, and those externalities that are prescribed.
Yes.
Whichever
I
one,
agree.
which those are. And so then you have this view, well, we're not only, I'm not only a good Christian, but I'm a good church because we don't allow our young people to dance.
That's right. Right. That whole thing of make room for Jesus, right?
Yeah. Leave room for the Holy Spirit. That's how they say it.
Yeah.
You got to leave room for the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, it depends on which church you're in. Yeah. Got to have space between you kind of thing. And all those standards, all of those. I mean, it's just, it does make you wonder what happened to the unity of the church.
Yeah. It's just it's an impossible situation that we deal with, in that we're physical beings living, inhabiting a physical space.
Yeah.
Where things we do have a tremendous impact on the way we think, on the way we feel.
Yes.
And we assume it has a tremendous impact on our own spirituality. I don't think it does, but I think we assume that rightly. It's not a crazy assumption, because I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's not a crazy assumption.
No, you might be right.
Because we know it affects a lot of things, and I think we just assume if we get our actions right, it'll get our spirit right. Right.
There is some truth to that.
Right. So I'm saying, it's not a crazy assumption to see it that way. And it's almost impossible, in my opinion, not to assume it that way. And so we launch ourselves into tackling these our actions and the actions of those around us, and try to change the things we can change.
Right. Which eventually leads to not being able to change anything. And the terrible thing is, what happens if you don't do all the don't do's and you do all the do do's, if that makes sense? If we can say it that way. You meet all the requirements to do and don't, but spiritually you're still devastated, depressed, discouraged, not happy. Now what? It's like, what if you went to the doctor and the doctor said, well, you have this mental condition that's causing you to be depressed. Here, take these pills, and this will help. And you took those pills and it didn't help. Now what would you do? I need a different doctor. Okay, so what do you think people are doing about Christianity? Because if they follow all the prescription, but they're not finding peace and joy and happiness, then what? Well, find another religion. You need another doctor. And so it doesn't surprise me that we have churches that are aging out. The whole church is aging out. Nobody in there is younger than 60. And unless it's, a holiday and the families come to visit.
Right.
But otherwise, the church is essentially aging out and dying away. And why is it? Because that's what we've created. We created a prescription for the way we ought to be. That ought to be the identity we ought to have in Christ. And then people have that identity and they don't have the joy and peace and things like that they think should come from the connection between action and spirit. And
I think that even more than joy and peace, which are very important, I think that actually one of the things that is driving people from church is they're not finding holiness.
That's
now,
right.
I don't think they can articulate it that way.
You're right.
I think that this is a deep yearning, spiritual yearning, that rule keeping does not satisfy.
Yes.
It doesn't achieve. You don't achieve holiness through the mere keeping of rules. That's right. That is what the Old Testament should teach us.
Yes, it should.
Right? That's not. Now, it doesn't mean that living any way you want will get you there either.
No.
That's even worse.
Yeah.
Right? But that's not a great commendation for the other.
That's right.
Right? Just for something to be worse doesn't mean that it's that great.
That's right.
And I think
there's
that
no difference between a dead battery and a battery that won't start your car.
Right.
although one may run your radio forever.
There is, but yeah, exactly. Good point. Yeah, and so you look at it and you say, people look at this. I say people, we people, human beings, we look at this and we think, well, if it's not this, then it's that.
Right.
And I think what the teaching of the New Testament is that no.
Yeah.
This is something categorically different.
Yes.
Right. It's not rules or no rules.
Right.
Too many people hear this discussion, I think, and will immediately jump to the idea that what I'm advocating is antinomianism.
Right.
That should get rid of all rules.
Right.
No rules. Do anything you want. Everything is legal.
Right.
Everything is right. How did Paul put it? Is legitimate. I can't think of the word in English.
Lawful.
Lawful. Thank you. Everything is lawful. All things are lawful. Do anything you want. It's like, no.
Yeah.
So we need to have more rules. No.
But that wasn't Paul's thing. His thing wasn't, all things are lawful for me, therefore I'm going to do whatever I want to do. No, he didn't say it that way.
Right.
That's said, right. All things are lawful for me, but I am not going to be brought under the power of any.
And not all things are expedient.
But not all things are expedient.
But exactly. And I think his point is brilliant in that he's saying, no, this is entirely different.
Yes.
It's not about whether it's illegal. All things are legal.
Right.
But I'm not looking at it through the lens of legality.
I really don't care whether it's legal or not.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly. Doesn't matter if it's legal. It matters. There's another path that I'm on.
Yes.
A different path where I'm not judging things based on whether they're legal or illegal.
That's right.
It has no point, it has no bearing whatsoever on my behavior.
That's
the
right.
bearing on my behavior is the interest in following and walking in the Spirit.
That's right.
That's what matters to me. That I walk in the Spirit. And that educates, informs my actions.
Yes.
My actions become a result, an afterthought practically, that spiritually I'm walking in Christ. I'm in Christ.
And I
And
know
I'm dead in him.
And I know that people immediately I can hear the people. And I've had this conversation with them, right? That they're like, okay, but you're really not telling me anything then, right? Because now what you're saying,
Yeah, they're
is,
like, so can I dance?
yeah. I meet people a little more sincere than that, right? We've had this conversation with people.
Well, that's what I've had. I've had people say, "Can I do this?" X, let's say dance, and I give them that explanation, and then they say, "Okay, so then it's okay or
Right.
not okay?" Like,
sad. That's just sad.
yeah, it's like, oh, no, you don't understand.
Yeah. No, the ones that I think are a little more sincere would say, yeah, but then how do I actually know that I'm right? How do I know that I'm living the right way and doing the right thing if I don't follow a list somewhere? Then I'm driven to check the boxes, and you told me there's no boxes to check. And my answer is, no, I didn't say that. I said there's only one box to check. And once you check that box, all the other ones don't matter anymore. And that one box is whether or not this is in the Spirit, whether or not you're actually walking with God in this thing. Yeah, but how do I know if I'm walking with God in this thing? Well, now that's a completely different question.
Right, and I think that's
That's a legitimate question.
it is a legitimate question, and it's a very hard thing.
Yes.
That must be evaluated on a continual basis.
Yes.
And I think people don't want that hard work.
Right.
And again, by people, I don't mean other people. I mean human beings, myself.
I mean
number one at
sincere
the
Christians
top.
who really want to know.
That's right. Myself right at the
Yeah.
top. Do not want that. I would
Right.
it's much easier to get 10 commandments.
Sure.
Far easier to say, this is what you can do, and this is what you can't do. Much easier than to say, walk in the Spirit.
Right.
That's hard.
Yes.
That's my objection to anyone who thinks that the reason we're not under the law is because Christ wanted to make it easier on us. I mean, talk about not understanding.
Right. But that also has another problem, and that is that it isn't the same every day.
That's true.
Because sometimes God's going to say, that was fine for you when you were a child. I'm asking you to set that aside now and step into another step of this relationship with me and set that one aside and do it no more. Do this instead. Like Paul. And so it means I can't look at somebody else and say whether or not they're walking in the Spirit. Because I don't know where they are in that relationship with the Lord now. I don't know what the Lord is asking them to do. And he could be asking them to live at a different standard than he asked me to live at. And it's still right for them. It's not sin. It's just a different standard because they're walking with the Lord differently than I am. They're made of different stuff than I am. I can't even ask my kids, don't you wish it was possible, right? You had 3 kids, and how close were they to being the same? Absolutely nowhere near.
Yeah.
It's not even night and day, because it's like night and day are opposites, right? But now you got a third one. What's opposite of the other
Twilight.
2, right? I don't know what it is.
My third was Twilight.
Twilight, yeah. It's like, this is weird. How did I get 3 kids that are all so different? And so I can't actually, my older ones are looking at Wesley saying, you don't know how easy you have it compared to the way we have it.
That's what every firstborn, secondborn say to the
Yes.
lastborn.
But then I remind them, hey, do you know, when I would tell you, if you say that again, I'm going to take everything out of your room for a week, and you would say it again? Yeah. If I look at him and say, Wesley, you're pushing it, he stops.
Exactly.
He doesn't make make
Exactly.
me say, okay, now this is what I'm going to do if you push it. He doesn't. I never got to that level with him. Well, that's because we told him not to go there. Well, for whatever reason, It's not that I'm treating him.
Why'd you tell him?
Right? You should have let him live it out, right? No, but the point is he's a different personality.
Yeah.
And he's going to live a different, and therefore, when he says something like, hey, I'm going to go out and hang out with my friends tonight, I'm like, I know all of his friends. 99% of the time they're hanging out at my house.
Yeah.
And I want them there because I don't mind buying $100 worth of pizza on a Friday night to have them all at my house because I know where they all are and what they're doing. And I know what his friends are like. And therefore he says, I'm going to go hang out with my friends. I'm happy with it. Go hang out
the
with your
objection,
friends.
though, to this that many will have, that I would have had short time ago, that by saying all this, what it can be misconstrued that we're saying is that
There's no such thing as
we
sin.
should be completely open-minded and tolerant of everyone's behavior.
Right.
Right. And that is not at all what
That is not what
I think you're saying. It's not what I'm saying
No.
whatsoever. In fact, quite the opposite.
Yes.
But what we need to be promoting with vigor, with vehemence even, is dying to self, being crucified with Christ, living in the Spirit. I don't know how to do that. So I'm not here to say how that I know how to do that and I'm great at it, because I'm certainly
Here's the
not.
5 steps.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even know how to tell people how to do that, right? I
Right.
don't even know how to preach it right.
Right.
Much less how to implement it in my own life. But that is what we should be preaching, and that preaching, in my opinion, is far more onerous, more burdensome, if you will, than the pseudo holiness preaching of don't do this deed, don't act this way, don't do this action,
Right.
don't say this word, don't go to this place, don't
Right.
drink this liquid, right? Don't ingest this food or whatever.
Yeah, it's so much harder because you're not just preaching against a bunch of things everybody already doesn't want to do. Right?
Yeah.
That's the problem is when you're saying don't, Christians shouldn't be drinking and dancing and you're standing in church with a whole bunch of Christians and they all say, amen, amen.
Yeah, that
This is evil.
and you're also basically prescribing a spiritual diet. It's just right.
Yes.
That's what you're doing. You're saying you are spiritually overweight,
Yes.
spiritually obese, and what you need to do is you need to go on a diet.
Yeah.
So you're going to stop eating these things and drinking these things and go into these places. I mean, it's exactly what a self-help guru will prescribe to you if you're physically overweight.
Right.
That's what we're doing. We're going to give you a spiritual diet. We're going to make you spiritually skinny. You're going
Yeah.
to look skinny.
But
You're still going to, but whenever you see the cake, you're going to want it.
Yeah.
You're just going to tell yourself, you're going to slap your hand and you're going to say, no, not going to eat that cake.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And that's all wonderful, and you'll get thin, right? You'll lose weight. It
Yeah.
works. Diets work if you follow them.
Yeah.
And the more religious you are about them, it's interesting they call it being religious,
Yeah.
right? The more religious you are about a diet, the more it's going to work. It's not going to mean you're not going to want that cake every
That's
time you
right.
see it.
That's right. And it's not going to solve that problem for you.
No.
You'll dream about and it'll call your name from the kitchen in the middle of the night.
Yes, that's right. It'll call your name from the Popeyes down the street.
Yeah, it will.
That apple pie
Yeah.
is calling your name.
Yeah, that's right. See?
And so if our goal is to get people looking thin, spiritually fit, well then, okay, that's probably a good way of going about it. If our goal is that they actually have a change of heart, right? A change in desire, well, that doesn't get you anywhere close to that.
That's right.
That's the
right.
problem. And so the question then is, what is the actual goal of the church? What's the goal of Christ? Was the goal of Christ to make us so that we all look fit?
No.
Or was the goal of Christ have nothing to do with the appearance, right? But had to do with where our heart was.
Right.
And I'm not sure we can address the two at the same time because not because they, in theory, they can't be addressed at the same moment, but because I think that gets lost in translation.
Yeah, I think there's another thing, and it's interesting to me because in my mind there's a lot of parallels between this and our former conversation about artificial intelligence. Right? There are just some things I look at intelligence and I say, you could never build it. It's not actually possible to build that into a computer. You can't build will into a computer. I can make it obey instructions, and I can make such a huge set of instructions that it might resemble will, but in the end, it's just an act. And the same thing is true here, right? You can build this whole set of instructions that resemble holiness, and they make a really huge one so that it really resembles holiness, but in the end there's no holiness there,
Hmm.
right? It's the same problem. But when I go to the illustration that Paul gave of the church and the body, it becomes apparent that what is healthy for my eyes may not be the same thing that builds health in my hands. It isn't it and if you fast too much, you can hurt your heart. There's this the health of the body isn't the same thing as the health of one of its individual parts. And not at all. It's not the same conversation. And so if I am one of those parts and I say, well, this is what you do to be healthy, the other part who's not like me is not going to get healthy by doing what I said. Just the fact that it made me healthy might not make you healthy. And what we want is we want to be able to say, we want to be the guru who says, well, look at me. I used to be skinny and get beat up and sand thrown in my face at the beach but now I'm Charles Atlas and this is how I got there. And you do it, you'll get there exactly the same way, right? You'll be just like me. Well, no, you won't. Right? And it's and we want a prescription, and there isn't one of those. And when we say there's, Christianity is about a relationship with Jesus Christ, everybody wants to use that word, but if you actually thought about that for a minute, you'd think that's a crazy concept. Because what it means is, like, look, I know people who have had their spouses pass away and they got married again. Interesting thing is, they were the same person. But in the new marriage, they behaved differently than they did in the old marriage because they were married to somebody different this time than they were before. Does it mean the old marriage was invalid? No. It means this is a different relationship than the other one. Does it mean there's no way to be right about what marriage means and what makes a good marriage? No, there's a whole lot of things you can say. This makes a good marriage, and if these other things can make a really bad marriage. But if you do all the good ones and you don't do any of the bad ones, it doesn't mean you have a good marriage.
Yeah.
It's a totally different thing to live with someone in a relationship and learn how to live with them. That's the interesting thing about marriage. You get married and you think, okay, we're married. No, you don't understand. You just started a journey. Now you're going to rub each other raw, and you're going to figure out how to get along with each other, and you're going to figure out how to compromise. You're going to figure out all this stuff, and nobody can tell you how to do it. Does that mean we tell people don't get married because nobody can tell you how to do it? No.
It would be the difference in that using the analogy. It'd be the difference between seeing certain activities in marriage as being markers, right? Mile markers, if you
Yes.
will, of a good marriage, as opposed to roadmaps to a good marriage.
Right.
Right. So, it's like when they say, how often do you tell your wife you love her?
Right.
You should tell her you love her 5 times a day.
Right.
Right. So if I say 5 times in one day, I love you,
Right.
then I have a good marriage.
No.
Not even close.
You haven't even scratched. You don't even. In fact, you could say that all you want, and after a little while, it sounds hollow and stupid.
Right. Exactly. But I could look at that and say, when's the last time I told my wife I loved her?
Yeah.
Well, not soon enough. It's been too long.
Right.
There may be something wrong with my marriage. I might want to look at our relationship
Right.
and tweak this because it's been a long time since I hugged her or since I said I love her or I bought her something nice that she appreciates or something like that. But you could buy her something every day and it doesn't make it a good marriage. So
that's right.
It's the same way with the idea of holy, what we're talking about with holiness and actions. One way is to look and say actions are the path to holiness, and the other way is to say actions are the mile markers in the path of holiness.
Right.
You can look at and say we are going the right way because look, we have these markers that are showing up.
Right.
Right. And it may seem like, it may sound for some people listening to this, it may sound like, 6 to 1 and half a dozen the other, like you're splitting hairs, but it's not splitting hairs in my view. It's a world of difference between the two.
So I think so too. I also think when I look at God and the people he talks about in Scripture, it seems more evident to me. I see living examples of it there. Like Enoch walked so close with the Lord that the Lord says, you know what? I'm going to make an exception on this one. He's never going to die. I'm just going to translate it and take him home with me. he walks so close with Abraham that he calls him his friend, but he doesn't translate Abraham. It's a different relationship. And then you look at and Abraham really has one war to fight in all of his, and it's the battle of the five kings, and it's one war in all of his life that he has to really fight. And the Lord isn't to him the shield and buckler, the sword. He's not all that to Abraham. But David is a soldier, and David walks with the Lord, and to the Lord, or to David, the Lord is buckler and shielder and fortress and all those soldierly things in his relationship with the Lord. And then Paul makes it very apparent that him and the apostles were set apart to suffer things in an unusual way and to have to do things that God wasn't going to call the general Christian to have to do. But the apostles were going to go through those things because they were in that position, in that relationship with the Lord. And so for whoever you are, when you're listening to this podcast, whoever you are, what you really need isn't an instruction book. You've got that in the Bible, but that's not it's not really what you're looking for. What you're really looking for is, how do I walk with the Lord? Me, in my relationship with the Lord, which is going to be different than everybody else's. How do I walk with the Lord? Which isn't the same thing as, what can I get away with and still be walking with the Lord?
Yeah.
That's not the same thing. Because if a guy looked at his wife and said, what can I get away with and still be her husband? That is not at all. You wouldn't look at that and say, well, that's going to lead to a good marriage. You'd look at that and say, that's going to lead to danger.
Yeah.
That's going to lead to failure.
Yeah.
And the same thing the other way around. It isn't, and it isn't, what do I have to, what's the complete list of everything I have to do in order to be a husband? Well, that's not a good way to marriage either. In fact, that's going to lead to failure. And you can't do the same thing with the Lord. What's a good way? What are the few things, the complete list of everything I have to do to be right with God? No, this is a relationship. You're going to have to get to know him. You're going to have to get to know what pleases him that you do. I am reminded of, what was his name now? I had it just a moment ago. They made the movie Chariots of Fire about him, the runner.
I know who you are. I can't ever,
Is it Jim Ryan? No, it isn't. But anyway, he once wrote to his sister, who talked to him about, why would you do this? Because you're going to have to run on Sundays, the Lord's Day, and you're going to have to be running on Sundays.
Eric Liddell.
Eric Liddell, that's right. Eric Liddell.
Little, is that how you pronounce it? Little?
Little. And he wrote back to her and he said, God made me fast. And when I run fast, I can feel the Lord's pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, God made you something. And when you fulfill that purpose, you'll feel his pleasure. And you'll be walking with the Lord. And perhaps I go out and run, and the Lord's like, look at that. It's a comical thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's not his pleasure. It's just funny, right? I do other things that bring the Lord pleasure. And the same thing will be true for you. And there's no book that's going to describe that. There's no book that describes any relationship.
Yeah. There's certainly not a rule book for it.
Certainly not a rule book.
Not one. Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, very good.
Very good.
Well, I don't know that I resolved any of my issues I have with AI, but I enjoyed the conversation. I'm still very interested in another discussion one day. I would like to continue our discussion on science. There's a lot of things I've been thinking about on that as it pertains to the Bible and Christianity and stuff. And, the main thing with that is like creationism, resolving that in my mind. I know some Christians have issues with it. But just all of how, because science is becoming bigger and bigger in our lives, in many ways. As human beings, it seems to me it's just getting bigger and bigger, at least in perception, right? Because it's getting louder. Maybe it's just getting louder. I don't know, but
it is getting louder and louder.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way: it's being used more and more by politicians as a weapon.
Yeah, and I find too often Christians are on one are like on one of two sides of it. They're either coward in fear over it and won't stand up to it, or they are vehemently opposed and they won't listen. And it's like so few, it seems this way anyways. It seems, and it maybe it's just my misperception, but it seems that so few seem to have a moderate grasp of it, and there's a temperate view of it. It's like either we love it or we're afraid of it, and we can't say anything that might be unscientific or will be mocked, or we can't say anything scientific or we won't be spiritual.
Yeah, boy, those are both.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't even think those are opposite extremes. I think those are like
just
I don't know
variations of the same extreme.
I don't know. Those are weird positions to me. I'm not sure I understand either one of them. There's another position that I see often, which is people who are constantly trying to make the Bible a science book.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I want to talk about all that, so I'll have to get you back on here and have a discussion on that. We're out of time today, but I would. That's one I would. We kind of got there. And I thought, I was going to bring some things up, but I didn't want to. We'll just wait because that's a whole long conversation. I got some ideas I want to run past you. And
that is a good one. That's a great conversation. Let's do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Michael Pemberton, for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Michael Jackson, for having me here today.
All right. You guys take care. We will be. All the camera work was my fault. Okay, you say this is horrible camera work. You're absolutely right. Nolan couldn't be here, so you can see how bad things are when I'm doing these things.
So now you really understand the value of Nolan. If you're viewing us today,
I've always understood.
I don't know that they always understood it, but now they do. Now
I highly value Nolan. He's so much better at this than I am.
He is really good at it.
Yeah, I'm no good. So you might want to just listen to this and not watch it because it probably is unwatchable.
We should say that at the beginning.
I will. I'm going to put a disclaimer at the beginning.
Okay.
Because this is actually going to not airing live. This is going to be up later. We're going to be on vacation. And you're going to be there. I don't want to hear any excuses. Linda? Well, it'd be too late by now. I am predicting it to Linda. You will be there. So anyways, thank you for being with us. Take care.